There are moments in life that split everything into before and after. For Victoria Ellison, it was the sound of metal tearing apart on a rain-slicked highway. For Nathan Cross, it was the morning his daughter asked him why mommy's side of the bed was still empty after 2 whole years. 2 people, 2 kinds of broken. In one city, Chicago, that kept moving around them as if grief were something you could just drive past. This is their story, and it will cost you nothing except your time. But it might give you something back you didn't know you'd lost. If this story finds something in you, hit the like button and leave a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now, let's begin. The alarm on Nathan Cross's phone went off at 4:47 in the morning, and he was already awake. He lay on his back in the dark of his apartment on the northwest side of Chicago, staring at the watermark on the ceiling that had been there since before he moved in. The landlord had promised 3 times to fix the roof. Nathan had stopped expecting it. There were things you learned to live with. The cold draft from the window that didn't seal right. The elevator that skipped the 3rd floor on cold mornings. The particular silence of a bed that used to hold 2 people and now held 1. He reached over and killed the alarm before it fully rang. He didn't want it to wake Emma. In the kitchen, he measured coffee with the precision of someone who had done it enough times that it had become something close to ceremony. 2 scoops, not 3. The bag was running low, and payday was Thursday. He listened to the city starting up outside. The low rumble of a garbage truck 2 blocks over, a car alarm that someone had given up trying to silence, a siren that faded east toward the lake. Chicago in February was a specific kind of miserable. Not the dramatic, cinematic misery of a snowstorm, just the gray, grinding kind that settled into everything. The seams of your jacket, the corners of your mood, the miles you still had to put on before the day was done. Nathan Cross was 32 years old, and most days he felt older than that. He poured his coffee and stood at the kitchen window in the half-dark, watching the street below. A man walking a dog. A woman in scrubs heading toward the bus stop. The small, ordinary machinery of people getting through another day. He drank his coffee standing up because sitting down felt like something you did when you had time to spare. He didn't have time to spare. By 5:30, he had showered, dressed, and was standing in the doorway of Emma's room. She was 7 years old, and she slept the way only children sleep, completely, with her whole body, her hair across her face, and one arm hanging over the edge of the mattress. He watched her for a moment. It was one of the only things that still felt completely uncomplicated. He had a laminated schedule on the refrigerator that covered Emma's mornings. The neighbor, Mrs. Okafor, who came at 6:15 and walked Emma to school. The after-school program that ran until 5:30. The phone numbers listed in order of importance. It was the kind of infrastructure you built when there was no one else to build it, when you were both parents and had to figure out how to be everywhere at once without actually being everywhere. He wrote a note and left it on the kitchen counter where Emma would find it. Lunch money in the blue envelope. Wear your heavy coat. I'll be home by 6. Don't feed Mrs. Okafor's cat through the window again, she told me it started expecting it. He signed it the way he always did. Not love, Dad. Emma had decided when she was 5 that this was too formal. Just a small drawing of a wheel, which was Nathan's symbol, because he drove, and Emma had decided this was funny and also accurate. He put on his jacket, checked his phone, and went to work. Nathan had been driving professionally for 4 years. Before that, he'd done 2 years of community college with a vague idea about engineering, worked 3 years at a logistics company loading freight, and before that a stretch in the Army that had left him with a mechanical aptitude, a habit of checking exits when he walked into rooms, and a lower back that complained in cold weather. He drove for a rideshare platform most days, but the real money, the reliable money, came from contracted work, corporate accounts, airport transfers, the occasional long-haul private client. He'd built a reputation over the years for being on time, being quiet when people needed quiet, and not pretending he hadn't heard things he'd clearly heard. That last part mattered more than people expected. A lot of people talked in the back of a car the way they talked in an elevator, not because they'd forgotten you were there, but because your presence had been mentally filed into the category of not a person. Nathan had never decided how he felt about that. It was just part of the landscape. This particular Thursday morning, he had an airport pickup at O'Hare at 6:45, a corporate loop from downtown to the suburbs at 10, and an open afternoon that he was planning to fill with rideshare until the school pickup at 5:30. He was on his second cup of vending machine coffee in the O'Hare arrivals hall when his phone buzzed with a message from the dispatch service he used for contracted work. The message said, "New client inquiry. High-value contract, accessibility requirements. Please call to discuss." Nathan stared at the message for a moment, then went to get his airport passenger. The client's name was Miriam Osei, and she was the personal assistant to Victoria Ellison. Nathan didn't recognize the name at first. He knew it the way he knew most names that appeared in the financial press, as background noise, the general hum of wealth and business that existed in a different register from the one he moved in. But Miriam explained it on the phone that afternoon, speaking with the careful efficiency of someone who spent most of their day translating between the language of very important people and the language of everyone else. Victoria Ellison, 33, CEO of Ellison Capital Group, a private investment and development firm with holdings in commercial real estate, renewable infrastructure, and early-stage technology. One of the youngest CEOs in the company's history, named to 3 different industry lists in the past 5 years. In January, 4 months ago now, she had been involved in a serious car accident on the Edens Expressway. Her driver had been killed. Victoria had survived, but with significant spinal injuries. She was currently using a wheelchair and receiving ongoing rehabilitation. She needed a personal driver. Not a rideshare, not a rotation. A dedicated driver. Consistent schedule, consistent person. The accessibility requirements included a vehicle suitable for wheelchair transfer, patience, and, Miriam paused here, choosing her words, discretion. What does discretion mean in this context? Nathan asked. It means Miss Ellison is a private person who has recently had her privacy significantly compromised. It means what happens in the car stays in the car. And it means if you're the type of person who photographs clients or sells information to anyone, you should decline this inquiry now and save us both the trouble. I'm not that type, Nathan said. Good. Then there's a standard NDA for drivers. The compensation is 20% above market rate for contracted private work. There's also a vehicle stipend if you're willing to use a specific chair-accessible vehicle that we can arrange. The schedule is typically 6 days a week with Sunday off. Are you interested in discussing terms? Nathan thought about the coffee that had been $3 and tasted like nothing. He thought about the laminated schedule on his refrigerator. He thought about the roof that wasn't going to get fixed. Yes, he said. I'm interested. He met Miriam Osei in person the following Monday at the offices of Ellison Capital Group on Michigan Avenue, 42 floors up, in a building that made certain statements about money simply by existing. Miriam was in her late 40s, trim and precise in a gray blazer, with reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, and the specific expression of someone who had vetted many drivers before Nathan and found most of them wanting. She walked him through the NDA with brisk efficiency, answered his questions about the vehicle arrangement with numbers he'd written down and done math on later, and gave him a printed schedule for the first week. She'll want to meet you before officially starting, Miriam said. That's standard. She meets everyone who works directly with her. Understood. A few things to know. Miriam set down her pen. Miss Ellison was, before January, extremely active. 12-hour days, multiple sites, constant travel. The adjustment to her current situation has been difficult. She may seem withdrawn. She may seem sharp. Both of those things are true about her, and neither is personal. Okay? She doesn't need help unless she asks for it. She will tell you what she needs. Don't anticipate unless the situation is genuinely urgent. She spent the last 4 months being treated as though she's incapable of deciding things for herself, and she's tired of it. Nathan nodded. That makes sense. Miriam studied him for a moment. You're not curious? Most people ask more questions. I'll figure out the rest by paying attention. Something shifted in Miriam's expression. Not quite approval, but a recalibration of some internal estimate. Fine, she said. She'll see you Wednesday morning at 9. Victoria Ellison lived in a condominium building in Lincoln Park, in a unit that had been significantly modified following the accident, widened door frames, lowered countertops in the kitchen, a bathroom that had been essentially rebuilt from the studs out. Nathan learned this later, from details he noticed, not from anything anyone told him. The first time he saw her, she was in the lobby of her building, already waiting, already looking at her phone. She was in a manual wheelchair, not the larger power model, Miriam had explained, because Victoria refused it on the grounds that she was still capable of moving herself and intended to remain so. She had dark brown hair pulled back with the practical urgency of someone who didn't have time or patience for it to be otherwise. She was dressed in a charcoal blazer over a white shirt, dark trousers, and her posture was, and this was the word Nathan reached for later, trying to describe it to himself, deliberate. She sat like someone who had decided exactly how to sit. She looked up when he walked toward her, and her expression was the expression of someone conducting an evaluation. "Nathan Cross?" she said. "Yes, ma'am." "Don't call me ma'am. I'm 33. She put her phone in the bag on her lap. "What kind of vehicle?" He told her the make and model, a modified SUV, dark gray, with the rear passenger door and seating configured for wheelchair transfer. He had practiced the transfer setup twice the night before, alone in a parking structure in River North, until it was smooth enough that it wouldn't be a production. "You practiced it," she said, watching his face. "Yes." "Why?" "Because the first time doing something in front of someone shouldn't be the time you're still working it out." She looked at him for a moment. "Okay," she said, and wheeled herself toward the door. The first week was mostly logistics. Nathan drove Victoria to 2 medical appointments, a physical therapy session at a rehabilitation center in Streeterville, a meeting at a building she owned in the West Loop, and a lunch with a woman who turned out to be her attorney. He learned the routes she preferred, which changed depending on traffic patterns she'd apparently memorized before the accident and still expected to hold. He learned she did not like music in the car unless she put it on herself. He learned she worked on her phone and her tablet simultaneously during most of the drives, and that she had a habit of reading something, putting it down, staring out the window for exactly 45 seconds, and then picking it back up. He learned she drank her coffee black and too hot, and then complained about it being hot every single time. He did not learn much else that week because she didn't offer it and he didn't ask. What he did notice, she was tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. The kind of tired that comes from fighting something without an end in sight. He recognized it the way you recognize weather you've been in before. On Friday afternoon, after he had dropped her back at her building and was pulling away from the curb, she called his phone. He picked up on the second ring. "Yes?" "Next Monday. I have a 7 a.m. physical therapy session, then a meeting at 10 at the office. But I want to go by the Ravenswood development site first. Between PT and the meeting, it'll be tight." "What's the address of the site?" She gave it. He already knew the approximate area from a previous run he'd done for a different client, and he ran the route in his head. Therapy Center to Ravenswood to Michigan Avenue in a morning window with school traffic building. "I can make it work," he said, "if PT ends by 8:30. "It'll end by 8:30. Then I'll have you at the site by 8:50 and the office by 9:55. A pause. "Fine." She hung up. Nathan put the phone down and pulled into traffic. He thought, without really deciding to think it, she used to run this city from the front of a conference room. Now she's triple-checking if she can make it to a site she owns. He didn't say that to anyone. He just drove. The thing about driving people for a living was that you became, over time, a student of what people needed from you versus what they said they needed from you. Some clients needed to talk. They would narrate their day, their frustrations, their plans, sometimes their marriages, and what they actually needed was not a conversation. They needed something that felt like a conversation but placed no obligation on them to listen. Nathan could do that. He asked the right questions at the right intervals and said very little else, and people left the car feeling heard. Some clients needed silence, pure silence, the kind that was its own form of service. They were managing something, a difficult call, a decision they hadn't made yet, a grief they were carrying quietly. They needed to not be asked about it. Victoria was the second kind, but her silence was not peaceful. It had texture. There were mornings when he could feel the effort it cost her to be in the car at all, the low-grade humiliation of needing to be taken somewhere rather than driving herself, the careful blankness she maintained while strangers in other cars looked over and looked away. Chicago was not always a kind city to visible difference. Nathan didn't do anything about this because there was nothing to do. He drove. He was on time. He had the car at the right temperature. The coffee she liked was from a specific place on Erie, and he memorized the order in the first week without being asked. He watched the way the city looked at her, sometimes, in the reflection of the window, and he thought about the particular experience of having been one kind of person, and then, suddenly, being another kind. Not by choice, not by any failure of your own, but because one ordinary Tuesday night a piece of machinery failed on a wet highway and rearranged everything. He knew something about that experience, though his version of it had come on a different kind of highway, in a different kind of emergency, and what it had rearranged was not his body, but the entire architecture of his life. He didn't share this. It wasn't the time, and he wasn't sure it would ever be the time. He drove. The Ravenswood site visit happened the following Monday, as planned. Nathan had the car at the PT Center at 7:58, and they made it to the site with 2 minutes to spare. Victoria wheeled herself across a temporary plywood surface the site crew had laid over uneven ground, and Nathan stood near the vehicle and watched her talk with the site foreman, a big man named Ruiz, who clearly had not expected her, had clearly been briefed that she would not be coming back in a leadership capacity anytime soon, and was visibly recalibrating as she asked him specific technical questions about subgrade preparation and structural load ratings. After 20 minutes, she wheeled herself back toward the car, and Nathan opened the door. "You know anything about construction?" she asked, not looking at him. "Some. I did a year on a commercial crew before the Army, mostly framing and concrete." She paused, hand on the door frame. "You were in the Army?" 4 years, logistics and vehicle maintenance." She was quiet for a moment. "The framing company was in Chicago?" "Evanston. One of my uncle's jobs." She got in the car. He closed the door. When he got in on the driver's side, she said, "Ruiz doesn't know what he's doing with the drainage spec. I've been trying to tell the project manager for 2 months." Nathan put the car in drive. "Was he listening today?" "More than before." "Because you showed up." She was quiet. Then, "Yes." He pulled into traffic, and neither of them said anything else until they reached the Michigan Avenue office. But something had changed slightly in the air between them. Some minor rearrangement, barely measurable, like the shift in pressure before weather. Nathan did not bring Emma to work. He was clear about this with himself. This was a professional relationship with specific boundaries, and those boundaries were worth maintaining. Emma was not part of the job, but Emma was 7, and 7-year-olds do not always cooperate with the professional boundaries of their parents. It happened on a Thursday in late March, which was technically spring on the calendar and practically still winter in Chicago. Emma's school had called at 11:30 with a mild fever. Not sick enough for the ER, the nurse clarified, just sick enough that they couldn't keep her. Nathan was in the middle of a 2-hour window between morning appointments and an afternoon run. He called Mrs. Okafor, who was at her sister's in Skokie. He called the backup, his coworker Darnell's wife, who had helped twice before, and she was at a doctor's appointment of her own. He had to pick up Victoria at 2 o'clock. He drove to the school, got Emma, settled her in the back seat with a juice box and the small stuffed dog she'd had since she was 3. The one with the torn left ear that she'd never let Nathan fix because he's fine like that, and spent the drive back to his apartment calling every available option he had. Nothing. He sat in the parking structure near his building for 9 minutes, weighing it, then called Miriam. "I have a situation," he said. "My daughter is sick, mild, not serious. I've gone through my backup options. I can have Victoria at 2 o'clock, but I'll have Emma in the car. I wanted to tell you before I just showed up with her." A pause. "How old is Emma?" 7. "Does she get car sick?" "No." "Is she contagious?" "Probably not. School was being cautious." "Hold on." A muffled exchange that Nathan could not fully make out. Then Miriam came back on. "Miss Ellison says it's fine." "Okay, She also says, tell Emma she'll need to be quiet during the downtown portion because there's a call." Nathan looked at Emma in the rearview mirror. Emma was looking back at him with the steady, owlish expression she got when she was listening to adult conversations and didn't want anyone to know she was listening. "She can do that," Nathan said. "Chut." Emma was, to her credit, quiet during the downtown call. She sat with her stuffed dog and watched Chicago go by the window with the concentrated attention of a child encountering the city from this particular angle for the first time. And she did not say anything for a full 22 minutes. Victoria's call ended somewhere in River North. There was a silence. Then Emma said, from the back seat, to no one in particular, "Those are really big buildings." Nathan watched Victoria's face in the rear view. Something shifted there. Not quite a smile, but the possibility of one. "They are," Victoria said. My dad says the tall ones have to go down underground as far as they go up, to not fall over. That's basically true. Emma considered this. How do they know how far to go down? Victoria turned slightly in her seat. Engineers calculate it, based on the soil type and the building weight and the wind load. What's wind load? How much force the wind puts on the building? Emma was quiet for a moment. My dad knows about buildings, she said. He did concrete. Victoria glanced at Nathan in the rear view. Nathan kept his eyes on the road. Did he? Victoria said. He knows a lot of things, Emma said, with the particular authority of a 7-year-old stating a fact she considers beyond dispute. He fixed Mrs. Okafor's radiator and she doesn't even pay him. She just gives him soup. That seems like a fair trade, Victoria said. It's really good soup, Emma agreed. Nathan said nothing. He drove. But there was something in the car that hadn't been there before. Some shift in atmosphere, some small warmth. They dropped Victoria at her building at 3:15. Emma had fallen asleep by then, the stuffed dog tucked under her chin. As Nathan came around to open the door, Victoria glanced back at Emma and then looked at Nathan. How long has it been, just the two of you? She asked. Her voice was different, lower, less managed. Nathan considered not answering. Then, 2 years. She looked at him for a moment. Something crossed her face. Not pity, which he would have felt and resented. Something closer to recognition. She's a good kid, Victoria said. Yeah, Nathan said. She is. He helped Victoria with the transfer. They exchanged the usual confirmations about tomorrow's schedule, and he got back in the car. He sat for a moment before starting the engine, listening to the sound of Emma's breathing. The slow, untroubled rhythm of a child asleep in the back of her father's car, not knowing and not needing to know what it costs to keep things steady. He started the car and drove home. April came the way Chicago April usually came, in pieces. Still cold some days, with sudden hours of real warmth that felt like the city exhaling after a long-held breath. Nathan had been driving Victoria for 2 months by then. The shape of the work had settled into a rhythm he understood. The morning pickups, the PT sessions, the office visits, the occasional site run or attorney meeting. He'd learned her preferred radio stations, her threshold for conversation, the specific 3-minute window after physical therapy sessions when she didn't want to talk at all and he should just drive. He'd also learned, from observation and from the things Miriam occasionally let slip, something about the shape of the problem Victoria was navigating. The accident had removed her from active leadership of her company. This had been framed, publicly and internally, as a temporary accommodation, a chance to recover, to heal, to return when she was ready. What it had actually created was a vacuum that other people had moved into. The man managing things in her absence was named Adrian Holloway. Nathan had seen him twice, once in the lobby of the Michigan Avenue building, talking to a cluster of men in suits with the smooth expansiveness of someone thoroughly comfortable at the center of attention. Once in the parking structure, getting into a car that cost more than Nathan made in a year. Nathan didn't know the specifics of the business situation. He knew that when Victoria came out of the office building after certain meetings, she was quieter than usual. Not the working quiet of someone processing tasks, but the particular silence of someone managing anger they've decided not to show. He said nothing about this. He drove. It was a Tuesday in mid-April when Emma came to work again, not because of a school emergency this time, but because of a scheduling failure that Nathan had arranged badly and couldn't undo without canceling a pickup. He couldn't cancel. Emma's after-school program had a teacher training day. Nathan had forgotten to plan for it. He'd remembered at 8 o'clock in the morning, exactly 4 hours before he needed to have Emma somewhere. He told Victoria directly this time, without going through Miriam. My daughter is coming again today, he said, when he picked Victoria up at 9. Same situation as before, I ran out of options. I'm sorry. Victoria was already in the car, already looking at her phone. She didn't look up. You don't have to apologize. I like to give warning. I know. It's fine. She put her phone down. Is she better? She had a fever last time. Completely fine. Good. She picked her phone up again. Emma was at school until 3 o'clock. They picked her up, and Emma got in the back seat with the energy of a child who had been sitting still all day and had a significant amount of accumulated motion to release. She was wearing a coat that was slightly too small for her and had a sticker on her hand that said, "Great Listener," in the optimistic blue font of elementary school reward systems. Hi, Emma said to Victoria. Hi, Victoria said. How was school? We learned about Lake Michigan, Emma said. Did you know it's one of the Great Lakes? There's 5 of them. I did know that. My dad says Lake Michigan is the best one. Why does your dad think that? Because we can see it, Emma said, with a logic that clearly admitted no counter-argument. Victoria made a sound that was not quite a laugh, but was close enough to one that Nathan noticed it. He watched her in the rear view. She was looking at Emma with an expression he hadn't seen on her before. Soft, a little unguarded, like a door opened by accident. Emma, who had no understanding of walls people built around themselves and no particular interest in respecting them even if she had, launched into a detailed account of everything she knew about the Great Lakes. She got some of it wrong. Victoria gently corrected her. Emma accepted the corrections with total equanimity and continued talking. Nathan drove north on Lakeshore Drive, and outside the window the lake was bright and enormous and indifferent and beautiful. And for about 12 minutes the car was simply a small, warm space containing a child's voice and 2 adults who were, in their separate and complicated ways, learning how to still be alive. After that second afternoon with Emma, something changed in the way Victoria occupied the space of her days. It wasn't immediate. It wasn't dramatic. It was more like watching ice when the temperature creeps above freezing, not the theatrical crack and surge of a sudden thaw, but a slow, quiet shift in the nature of the material. Something that had been rigid beginning, barely perceptibly, to give. She started asking Miriam to schedule the PT sessions more aggressively, 3 days a week instead of 2. Nathan drove her and waited, and when she came out the door, usually 45 minutes to an hour later, she was tired in a different way than before. Specifically tired, muscularly tired, the kind of tired that comes from working rather than enduring. She also started going to the office more often, not just for scheduled meetings, but for drop-ins, showing up, looking at things, asking questions. The site foreman Ruiz began emailing her directly. She was reclaiming territory slowly from the outside in. Nathan watched this without comment. He drove. He was on time. He had the coffee order right. But one evening in late April, when he dropped her at her building and she didn't get out immediately, he waited. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Yeah." "Your wife." She paused. "You don't have to answer." He knew what the question was before she finished forming it. He'd gotten good at knowing where this kind of silence was heading. "She died 2 years ago," he said. "Her name was Claire. She had a stroke. She was 29. Victoria was quiet for a moment. The city moved around them. Someone walking a dog past the building entrance, a cab doing a U-turn on the street, the low constant presence of Chicago being itself. "I'm sorry," she said, not with the reflexive speed of polite condolence, but slowly, meaning it. "Thank you." "How did you—" She stopped. "Sorry, that's not—" "You can ask." "How did you keep going? After?" Nathan thought about it. He looked at his hands on the wheel. "Emma," he said. "Mostly just her. And then, you don't stop. The days keep coming whether you're ready for them or not. At some point you realize you're still here, and you might as well figure out what that means." Victoria looked out the window. "I used to run," she said. Her voice was flat and even, the tone of someone choosing a neutral register for a sentence that isn't neutral at all. 6 miles, sometimes 7, every morning. I had a route along the lakefront. I'd been doing it for 4 years. I used to think about problems while I ran. Work things. It's where I made most of my real decisions." A pause. "I haven't been back to the lakefront. I've been avoiding it." Nathan didn't say anything. "I don't know why I'm telling you this. Maybe because I didn't ask." She looked at him then, and the look was a little unsteady. Someone who had said more than they planned and wasn't certain how they felt about it. "I'll see you tomorrow," she said. 8 o'clock. She got out. He waited until she was inside the building, which was habit, not sentimentality. Then he pulled away from the curb and drove north through the April city, past buildings whose foundations went as deep underground as they reached toward the sky, and thought about nothing in particular, or maybe about everything, which sometimes amounted to the same thing. The last Friday of April was the day Nathan's back went out. Not catastrophically. He was careful, had been careful for years, Knew the warning signs from enough previous episodes to treat his lower back the way you treated a coworker with a volatile temper, with respect, with awareness, without provoking it unnecessarily. He had done a long day Wednesday and slept badly Thursday and woke Friday morning with the specific stiffness that meant this is going to be a problem. He drove anyway. He picked Victoria up, drove her to PT, drove her to the office. By early afternoon, the stiffness had progressed to the grinding ache that meant he was pushing it. He sat in the car in the parking structure on Michigan Avenue and stretched carefully and told himself it would hold. He was dropping Victoria at her building at 4:30 when she noticed. "You're favoring your left side," she said. She wasn't looking at him. She was looking at the building entrance. "Has been since this morning." "I'm fine." "That's not what I said." He looked at her in the rear view. She was still looking at the building. "Old injury," he said. "Cold weather? It's fine." "You shouldn't drive tomorrow if it's not better." She opened the door. "I'm serious. Miriam can arrange a substitute. I'll see how it is tomorrow morning." "Nathan." She stopped, turned. Her expression was the same one she used with contractors who had given her technically accurate but fundamentally unhelpful information. "I have 2 PT appointments next week. I spend approximately 11 hours a week being told to take care of myself. I understand the irony of telling you this. Take care of yourself." He looked at her. Something in him shifted. Not much, just a fraction of a degree, the way a compass needle corrects itself when it's close to true north. "I'll see how it is tomorrow morning," he said again, but differently. She made a small sound that might have been frustration or might have been something else, and got out of the car. He watched her wheel toward the building. She moved with the same deliberate posture as always, spine straight, pace controlled. At the door, without turning, she raised one hand briefly. Not a wave exactly, more of an acknowledgement. The kind of gesture that means I know you're still watching, and this is me telling you it's okay to go. Nathan put the car in drive and went home to his daughter. The month of April ended. May came in cool and bright off the lake, and Chicago began, slowly and with its usual resistance, to become something that looked like spring. May arrived the way good things sometimes do. Quietly, without announcement, in the middle of an ordinary week when nobody was particularly looking for it. The lake, which had spent all of April looking like a gray steel plate, turned some particular shade of blue on the second Tuesday of May that Nathan hadn't seen since the previous summer. He noticed it on the drive down Lakeshore Drive and said nothing about it, but he took the lakeside route without Victoria asking, which was a small adjustment to his usual efficiency that she either noticed or didn't. She noticed. "You went south on LSD instead of cutting through Lincoln Park," she said, not looking up from her tablet. "Traffic on Fullerton." "Fullerton was fine this morning. I checked before I left." Nathan was quiet for a moment. Outside the window, the lake was enormous and flat, and that particular color that is not quite blue and not quite green and doesn't have a good name in English. "The lake looked good today," he said. Victoria lowered her tablet slightly. She looked out the window. The lakefront path was already busy. Joggers, cyclists, a man walking 2 dogs that were going in different directions. She watched it for a moment without saying anything. "It does," she said finally, and picked her tablet back up. That was all. But Nathan filed it away, not as a victory, not as a turning point, just as a data point about the specific geography of where she was at that particular moment in her recovery. Knowing where someone actually is matters more than knowing where you think they should be. The physical therapy was getting more serious. Nathan could tell not from anything she said, but from the way she moved in the hour after a session, the careful deliberateness of someone managing real muscle fatigue, the occasional tightness around her eyes that she smoothed out before she was fully in the car. Her therapist was a woman named Dr. Chen, whom Nathan had never met, but about whom he had formed a solid positive impression based entirely on the fact that Victoria seemed frustrated after sessions, rather than merely tired. Frustration meant being pushed. Being pushed meant progress. 3 sessions this week, he said one Wednesday morning, pulling away from her building. "Don't." "I'm not saying anything. You're doing the math on my schedule in your head, and you're about to make an observation about how 3 sessions is more than 2. I wasn't going to say anything. The silence is loud, Nathan. He kept his eyes on the road. I was just going to say the route to Streeterville is faster if we take Ohio this time of morning. A pause. Fine. Take Ohio. She was quiet for a moment, and then, and this was new, a variant he hadn't seen before, She said, "Dr. Chen thinks I might be able to stand with support by the end of the month." He kept his voice neutral. "That's good news." "It's a maybe, not a certainty. Still, I've had maybes before that didn't come through. I'm trying not to—" She stopped. "I'm trying not to count on it too much." Nathan thought about that. He thought about the specific danger of hope in a situation where hope had already been let down once or twice. He understood it personally in the way that you understand something after being on the wrong side of it. "I think," he said carefully, "that hoping for something and counting on it aren't the same thing." She didn't respond right away. He didn't push it. They were on Ohio now, the city doing its morning thing around them. A delivery truck double parked, a cyclist cutting between lanes, a woman in heels walking faster than the car was moving. "Maybe," she said at last. He let it rest there. Some things don't need a response, and he had learned, mostly through error in the years before he'd learned it, that the impulse to fill silence with more words was rarely about the other person's need, and usually about your own discomfort. He dropped her at the rehab center at 7:58, which was 2 minutes early, which was his standard. Emma had started asking about Victoria, not in the pointed, curious way she asked about most things she encountered. The Great Lakes, subgrade drainage, why Chicago winters were so much colder than what the map implied, but in the sideways manner she used when something had landed somewhere important inside her, and she was working out how to approach it. "Is Miss Victoria getting better?" she asked one evening, out of nowhere, while Nathan was making dinner and Emma was nominally doing homework at the kitchen table. "She's working on it," Nathan said. "Does it take a long time?" "Usually, yes." Emma chewed the end of her pencil, which she was not supposed to do. "My friend Jade's grandma uses a wheelchair. Jade says it makes her grandma mad sometimes." "It probably does." "Because she used to be able to do things herself?" "Yeah." Emma was quiet for a moment, considering. "I think Miss Victoria is the kind of person who likes to do things herself." Nathan set down the wooden spoon and looked at his daughter across the kitchen. She was looking at her homework with the expression of someone who has said the thing they meant to say and is now waiting to see what happens with it. "Yeah," he said. "I think you're right." Emma nodded, satisfied, and went back to her homework with an air of having resolved something. Nathan went back to the stove and stood there for a moment with the wooden spoon in his hand, thinking about the things children notice that adults have decided not to see. Emma was with him the following Saturday, not because of an emergency this time, but because Victoria had asked if Nathan could drive her on the weekend for a non-work errand, and Nathan had explained the Saturday situation honestly, and Victoria had said, "Bring her, it's fine." This had become, over the past few weeks, a more normal state of affairs than Nathan had originally planned. He wasn't entirely sure how he felt about that. He was almost sure he didn't mind it. The errand was a garden center in Wilmette. Victoria had decided, with the particular sudden decision-making of someone who has been thinking about something for a while and finally commits, that the terrace off her living room needed plants. She had no experience with plants. This she stated directly and without embarrassment. But she had decided she wanted living things in her space, and she was going to figure out the rest from there. Emma was beside herself with excitement about this. "Can we get flowers?" she asked, before Nathan had even parked. "It's her trip," Nathan said. "You're a guest." "Can we get flowers?" Emma said, turning this question toward Victoria. "What kind?" Victoria said. "The purple ones." "Which purple ones specifically?" Emma thought about this very seriously. "The kind that look like little bells, Victoria looked at Nathan. "Penstemon? Or maybe salvia?" Nathan held up both hands. "I did framing, not landscaping." They were in the garden center for almost an hour and a half, which was significantly longer than Nathan had estimated, and Emma turned out to be an asset Victoria had not anticipated. She could get to the lower shelves of the display tables, and she had clear opinions, which she shared freely, about what was beautiful and what was not. Victoria made decisions with the same precision she brought to her professional work, consulting a knowledgeable employee about light conditions and water requirements and soil composition, taking notes on her phone, asking follow-up questions. Nathan loaded the car. He loaded it efficiently, arranging the larger pots so they wouldn't shift in transit, which was a three-dimensional packing problem he solved without thinking about it. On the drive back, Emma fell asleep against the window with a small lavender plant in a terracotta pot wedged carefully beside her on the seat. Nathan had checked 3 times that it was stable before pulling out of the parking lot. Victoria was looking at the plant. She's going to want to know how it's doing, she said quietly. Probably. I've killed every plant I've ever tried to grow. Then this will be motivation. She made the sound that was almost a laugh. Nathan had stopped cataloging these as unusual. They were becoming a regular feature of the drive. My mother had a garden, Victoria said, when I was small, in the backyard of the house in Oak Park. She grew tomatoes and something that I think was basil, and everything else was flowers I couldn't name. She'd go out there in the evenings. She paused. I was always too busy to pay attention to what she was actually doing. You were a kid. I was 24 and visiting for Thanksgiving, and she was trying to show me something about what she'd planted, and I told her I had calls in the morning and I needed to prep. She said it with a flatness that was a specific kind of self-accounting, the tone of someone who has looked at a thing honestly and is still in the process of deciding what to do with the looking. That was the last Thanksgiving before she got sick. Nathan drove. The suburban streets gave way to the highway, and the highway opened up toward the city, and the lake appeared to the east. Still that particular shade of blue. Is she... He started. She passed, 3 years ago. A pause. Before the accident. So I have that, at least. I had time with her at the end. I didn't repeat the Thanksgiving mistake too many more times. That's something. Yeah. She looked out at the lake. It is. Emma stirred slightly against the window, murmured something about the purple flowers, and went back to sleep. Victoria watched her for a moment, and Nathan watched Victoria in the rear view. The look on her face that was so complicated he didn't try to name it. He drove them back to the city, the plant stable in the back, the lake keeping pace with them on the right. The first Monday of June, Victoria stood up. Nathan wasn't there for it. He was in the waiting area of the rehab center, which was where he always was during the sessions, not waiting in the car. Because the one time he'd waited in the car, she'd had to call him when she was ready, and he'd resolved not to make her do that again. He was sitting with the coffee he wasn't really drinking, reading something on his phone that he wasn't really reading, doing the specific low-grade waiting that was part of this job in a way that hadn't been part of earlier jobs. When the door from the therapy area opened and Victoria came through, he stood, automatically. And then he looked at her face. She was not crying. Victoria Ellison was not, in his experience, someone who cried easily, and the expression on her face was too complicated for any single word. But there was something in it, something that had been held very tightly for a very long time, some coiled internal tension that had shifted. Ready? He said, because he could tell she didn't want to talk about it yet. Ready, she said. They were in the car and on the street before she said anything. I stood, she said, for about 40 seconds, at the parallel bars, with Dr. Chen right there. I know. She looked at him. You don't know. Your face when you came out. She was quiet for a moment. 40 seconds. That's 40 more than yesterday. Don't. She stopped. Don't make it into a motivational thing. I'm not in the mood for that. I wasn't going to. Good. He drove. They were on Michigan Avenue now, the morning traffic moving steadily. He thought about what 40 seconds meant to a person who had run 6 miles every morning and then lost the ability to stand. He didn't say this. He drove. It hurt, she said. A lot. More than I expected. Yeah. I don't know what I thought, that it would feel triumphant. It just felt hard. Most things that matter feel hard when they're happening, Nathan said. The triumphant part comes later, sometimes much later. She looked at him from the corner of her eye. Is that from experience, or are you just saying what sounds right? Experience, he said. When Emma was born, it was the hardest 36 hours of my life. Claire's labor, the complications, being in that hospital not knowing, none of it felt triumphant. It felt terrifying. The triumphant part came later, when I was in the parking structure of the hospital at 2 a.m, and I called my father and I just started crying, which I hadn't done in probably 6 years. Victoria was quiet for a long moment. You cried in a parking structure. Level 3 of Northwestern Memorial, yes. She made the almost laugh sound, and this time it lasted a little longer than usual. Okay, she said. Okay, maybe later. That's all later means, he said. Not never. Just not right now. She looked out the window. They were almost at the office. The city was doing what Chicago does on a June morning, big and indifferent and beautiful, the way things are when they're not doing it for you, but you're glad to be near them anyway. Thank you, she said. It was quiet and direct and not preceded or followed by any qualification. Sure, Nathan said, which was the only way he knew to receive something like that without making it into more than it was. There was a board meeting the third week of June that Nathan knew about only from the way Victoria's schedule arranged itself around it. A density of preparatory meetings, long calls in the back seat that she signaled him to keep circling through Streeterville rather than stop. The specific briskness in how she handled everything in the surrounding days. He also knew about it from Miriam, who was operating at a level of controlled tension that Nathan recognized as someone managing a situation that required managing. Big week, Nathan said to Miriam in the brief minutes before Victoria came down on Thursday morning. Miriam gave him a look. You pay attention. It's the job. It's more than the job. She said it without criticism, more as an observation. The board meeting is next Tuesday. She's going to present to them in person for the first time since January. How is she feeling about it? She's not saying, which means she's nervous, which means she won't say she's nervous. Miriam looked at the elevator doors. She's been working on the presentation for 3 weeks. She knows the material better than anyone in that room. But it's been 6 months, and some of those people have made decisions in the last 6 months that they would prefer not to have examined. Adrian Holloway. Miriam looked at him with the expression of someone recalculating an estimate upward. You are observant. She goes quiet in a specific way after certain meetings. I noticed the pattern. Be careful with that, Miriam said, not unkindly. Noticing is fine. Getting involved is something else. I'm her driver. Yes, Miriam said. You are. The elevator opened and Victoria came through the lobby and the conversation ended, but Nathan thought about it during the drive to the first meeting. The careful edge in Miriam's voice when she said you are, the thing she wasn't quite saying beneath it. He was her driver. That was true. It was also true that somewhere in the past 4 months, the distance that made driving professional, the useful emotional remove, the not quite interchangeable but functionally similar version of yourself you brought to contracted work, had gotten more complicated. He noticed things about her the way you notice things about someone you've spent real time with. He knew she was sharper in the mornings than the afternoons. He knew the difference between her working silence and her difficult silence. He knew she had a slight habit of tapping her left thumb against her knee when she was working through a problem, which she did unconsciously and would probably deny if asked. He knew she had not, in the 4 months he'd known her, mentioned her former fiancé once, and that this silence was a different shape from her other silences. It was the shape of something deliberately not looked at. He knew that she was, underneath the controlled public bearing and the careful management of how much she let show, genuinely lonely. Not in a self-pitying way. She was not self-pitying. That was one of the things he'd determined pretty early. But in the factual way, the accident had stripped away a lot of the social architecture of her previous life. The colleagues who had been present before were subtly less present now. The fiancé was gone. The networking events, the industry dinners, the peripheral social texture of being an active executive, all of it had contracted when she contracted. He knew all of this the way you know things about people when you're regularly in a small enclosed space with them and you're paying attention. He did not examine too closely what it meant that he was paying this kind of attention. He was her driver. He drove. The Saturday before the board meeting, Nathan took Emma to the lakefront. This was a normal thing. They went when the weather allowed, walked the path from Fullerton down toward Navy Pier and back, sometimes stopped for food at one of the places Emma had opinions about. Emma was deeply invested in a hot dog stand near the chess pavilion run by a man named Leonard who remembered her name and always pretended to argue with her about whether ketchup was acceptable. Emma's position was yes. Leonard's was no. The argument had been going on since the previous September. They were walking back north, Emma slightly ahead with the excess energy that came from being allowed to run whenever the path opened up, when Nathan's phone buzzed. It was Victoria. A text, which was unusual. She called when she needed him, texted when it wasn't urgent. Sorry to bother you on Saturday. Are you near the lake by any chance? He looked at it for a moment, then he typed, Fullerton and the path. Why? A pause. Then, no reason? Never mind. He looked up. Emma was 20 feet ahead, looking at something in the water. He typed, "We're going to be here another half hour if you want to come down. No pressure." Another pause. Longer this time. "Miriam has the car today. I'd have to take a ride share, so take one." A long pause, long enough that he thought she wasn't going to answer. Then, "Okay." She arrived 22 minutes later, wheeling herself along the path from the Fullerton access ramp with the focused, self-sufficient movement he recognized from her best days, when the fatigue hadn't accumulated yet and she was in command of herself in the way that gave her something back. She was in a light jacket and her hair was loose, which was the first time he had ever seen it loose, and she looked simultaneously less like the managed professional version of herself and more like the actual version. Emma spotted her first. "Miss Victoria." She ran back toward Nathan without being asked, a restraint that Nathan recognized as his daughter making a genuine effort, which he appreciated, and stood next to him while Victoria made her way over. "Hi," Emma said, with the pent-up seriousness of a person who has been wanting to ask something. "How's the lavender plant?" Victoria stopped in front of them. Something in her expression was different from all the times Nathan had seen her in work contexts. Lighter, less arranged. "Still alive," she said. "I watered it twice this week." "Good," Emma said, satisfied. "Did you know you have to talk to plants?" "I've heard that." "My teacher says it's not proven by science," Emma said, conveying with her tone that she was unimpressed by this caveat. "But I think it's probably true anyway." "That seems like a reasonable position," Victoria said. They walked, Victoria rolling and Nathan and Emma walking, south along the path with the lake enormous and blue beside them, and the city standing on its own reflection to the west, and the Saturday afternoon crowd flowing around them in both directions. Emma talked. She had a great deal to say about Leonard the hot dog stand man, the ketchup argument, the Great Lakes, the science project she was doing about erosion, a dream she'd had about a fox, and whether the fish in Lake Michigan could hear music if you played it from a boat. Victoria, who had been in 2 high-stakes preparatory meetings that week and would be in the most consequential meeting of her year in 3 days, listened to all of this with the patient, full attention of someone who was giving themselves permission, for this particular hour, to not be in that other part of her life. Nathan walked between them, saying little, watching the lake and watching the two of them, and feeling the particular quality of the afternoon, the way certain ordinary hours, when you're in them, carry a weight that's not a burden, just a density, a fullness, the sense of being in a moment that is exactly what it is, nothing more required of it, nothing needed from it. He thought about Claire. He did this less than he used to, not because he loved her less or had forgotten anything, but because time does what time does, and there are fewer moments now that feel like absence and more that feel like carrying someone with you in a different way than before. He thought she would have had opinions about the ketchup argument. She would have sided with Emma. He thought, I should probably figure out what this is. The shape of the 4 months, the slow change in the landscape of the work, what it meant to look forward to the morning drive in the particular way he had lately begun to look forward to it. He should think about that with more clarity than he had been. He thought this, standing on the lakefront path with his daughter beside him and Victoria Ellison slightly ahead, stopped at the railing at the edge of the path and looking out at the lake with her face open and quiet in the June afternoon light. He thought about it, and then Emma called his name because there was a dog that needed admiring, and the moment moved forward, as moments do, into the next thing. They stayed at the lake until almost 4. Nathan walked Victoria back to the access ramp where the rideshare app showed a driver 3 minutes out. Emma hugged Victoria around the shoulders with the total unself-consciousness of a child expressing affection, which Victoria received with the brief, slightly stunned expression of someone who has not been hugged without a specific social occasion for it in a while. "Good luck, Tuesday," Nathan said. Victoria looked at him. "How do you know about Tuesday?" "I have your schedule." "The board meeting isn't on the schedule I gave you." "The gaps in the schedule told me." She looked at him for a moment with an expression he couldn't fully read. "I don't need luck," she said. "I have the numbers." "Then good luck with the room," he said. The rideshare arrived. He helped her, briefly, unnecessarily. She was fine, she had it, and she got in the car. Through the window, Emma waved. Victoria raised a hand. Nathan stood on the lakefront path with his daughter until the car was out of sight. Then Emma took his hand, which she was getting too old to do regularly, but still did sometimes, and they walked north toward Leonard's hot dog cart and the ketchup argument that had been running since September. The lake kept doing what the lake does, indifferent and enormous and present, not caring whether you were happy or broken or standing at the beginning of something or the end. Nathan Cross walked beside his daughter into the June evening, and somewhere across the city, in a condo in Lincoln Park, a lavender plant on a terrace was still alive. The board meeting on Tuesday went well enough that Victoria didn't talk about it at all on the drive home. Nathan had learned to read her silences by category. There was the working silence, tablet out, phone in one hand, the low hum of someone processing logistics. There was the tired silence, post-therapy, post-long day, the specific depletion of someone who had spent everything they had and was now just existing in the car until they could exist somewhere horizontal. And there was the quiet that came after something significant, something that required sitting with, not processing exactly, more like letting the dust settle before you looked at what the floor looked like. This was the third kind. He drove her home from the Michigan Avenue building at 6:40 on a Tuesday evening, and the city was doing what Chicago does in early summer dusk, the light going copper over the lake, the traffic thinning out toward the neighborhoods, the particular evening smell of the city that was exhaust and food and water and something harder to name. He took Lakeshore Drive south because the light was better that way, not because it was faster, and Victoria sat in the back and looked out the window and didn't open her tablet once. He didn't ask how it went. Halfway down the drive, she said, "They listened. Good." Holloway tried to table 2 of the agenda items. I didn't let him. Okay? He backed down in the room, in front of the full board. She paused. He won't stay back down. Nathan thought about that. He thought about the way Adrian Holloway occupied space. The particular ease of someone who had been operating without supervision for long enough that the absence of oversight had started to feel like permission. "What does that mean practically?" he asked. "It means he'll find another angle." Victoria's voice was even, analytical. The same tone she used to talk about drainage specs and load ratings. "He's been running things for 6 months. He has relationships I don't fully know about. Decisions made in my name that I haven't finished auditing yet. Are you concerned?" "I'm always concerned. Being concerned is just paying attention." She looked at the lake. "I'm also back, which changes the math for him. He knows I'm rebuilding. The question is whether he does something stupid before I'm fully positioned, or whether he's patient enough to wait." Nathan drove. "What do you need?" She glanced at him in the rear view. "What? What do you need, practically, to be positioned?" She was quiet for a moment. "Time, and the rest of the audit." "How long is the audit?" "My attorney says 4 to 6 weeks if we keep the pace." A pause. "There are some entries that are strange. In the maintenance records, on the corporate fleet." The word maintenance did something specific to the air in the car. Nathan wasn't sure she noticed it, but he noticed it. "The corporate fleet," he said, carefully. "The vehicles. The company keeps 3 executive vehicles. The one I was in when..." She stopped. "The one Marcus was driving. The accident. There were maintenance entries made in the 30 days before that I can't fully reconcile. Invoices for work I can't find external documentation for. It might be sloppy bookkeeping. It might be something else." She said it with the flatness of someone who has thought this thought before and has not yet decided to say it out loud to themselves, let alone anyone else. Nathan was quiet for a long moment. "Victoria," he said, which was the first time he had used her first name without the professional prefix, and neither of them noted it, but both of them heard it. "Have you talked to your attorney about that specifically? The maintenance entries?" "Not yet. I wanted to understand them better before I did." "Talk to her. Before you look at it any further yourself." She was quiet. "I mean it," he said. "I know you do." A pause. "You went somewhere just now, when I said maintenance records." "I was just thinking." "About what?" He kept his eyes on the road. "About the fact that sloppy bookkeeping and something else don't look the same if you know what to look for." She looked at the back of his head. He could feel it. "And you know what to look for?" "I know vehicles," he said. "Army logistics. 4 years maintaining fleet equipment. I know what real maintenance documentation looks like. And I know what it looks like when someone is building a paper trail that's meant to look like maintenance documentation." The silence that followed was the fourth kind, the one he didn't have a name for yet, the one that only happened when something that had been existing as a vague dread got a specific shape. I'll call my attorney tonight, Victoria said. He dropped her at her building. He waited until she was inside. He drove home on autopilot, his mind running through the things she'd said in the particular systematic way that had served him in the army and in the years since, not jumping to conclusions, just laying out what was known and what was adjacent to what was known, and what the space between them implied. He picked Emma up from Mrs. Okafor's and made dinner and helped with a worksheet about fractions and put his daughter to bed, and through all of it, some part of his mind was working quietly on the problem, the way a background program runs without claiming the foreground. By the time he lay down that night, he had a shape of something he didn't like at all. Tug. He found the first thing by accident. It was a Thursday, 2 days after the board meeting, and he was in the car in the parking structure below the Michigan Avenue building, waiting for Victoria to finish a 2-hour meeting with her attorney. He had his laptop open, a beat-up ThinkPad that he used for route planning and for the administrative side of the driving work, and he was updating his mileage log for the month when a news article in his open browser tab caught his eye. It was a 2-month-old piece from a Chicago business publication, a profile of Adrian Holloway and his management of Ellison Capital Group in the aftermath of Victoria's accident. The article was flattering in the specific way that articles are flattering when someone has cultivated the journalist carefully. There was a quote from Holloway about stepping into a difficult situation with the goal of stabilizing the company for Victoria's eventual return, and several paragraphs about his vision for the company's real estate holdings. Nathan read it the way he read most things, with a part of his attention, while another part was doing something else. He was about to close the tab when a name in the last paragraph stopped him. The article mentioned a restructuring of the company's executive vehicle fleet, approved by Holloway in February as one of his first administrative decisions, a contract awarded to a maintenance and logistics firm called Vantage Fleet Services for ongoing vehicle management. Nathan stared at the name. Then he closed the article and opened a different tab and typed in Vantage Fleet Services Chicago. The company had a minimal web presence, a single-page site with a phone number and a contact form registered in Illinois, listed as incorporated 14 months ago. The registered agent was an attorney's office. There was no client list, no team page, no physical address beyond a suite number in a Schaumburg office park. He sat with this for a moment. Then he opened another tab and searched for the incorporator, says, a name he'd found in the state business registry, and cross-referenced it with a few public sources, the kind of light research any reasonably careful person could do in 20 minutes without any specialized access. The incorporator was a man named Dale Pruitt. Dale Pruitt had been, until 16 months ago, the fleet manager for Ellison Capital Group. Nathan closed his laptop and sat in the parking structure for a long moment. Fleet manager leaves the company. 14 months ago. Starts a new company almost immediately. A year later, the executive who replaces the CEO during her recovery awards a fleet maintenance contract to this new company. And in the 30 days before the accident, there are maintenance entries in the company fleet records that the CEO cannot reconcile. This was either an elaborate coincidence or it was not. He did not do anything else that day. He waited for Victoria, drove her to her next appointment, and drove her home. He said nothing. He needed to know more before he said anything, and he needed to think carefully about what saying something would mean. What he did over the next several days was quiet and methodical and cost him sleep. He was not an investigator. He had no legal access to company records or financial information. What he had was time in parking structures and the kind of patience that comes from having spent years waiting for things. Waited out the army, waited out grief, waited out the long, slow work of being a father to a child who needed more than one person could theoretically give. He was good at sitting with incomplete information and working it carefully rather than forcing a conclusion. He found a second thing 5 days after the first, a civil court filing, public record, available online, from 11 months ago. A liability dispute between a vehicle maintenance contractor and an equipment supplier. The contractor listed in the filing was a name Nathan didn't recognize. But in the attached documentation, among the exhibits, was a service record for a 2021 executive SUV. The VIN number was partially redacted in the public filing. The make, model, and service date were not redacted. It was the same make and model as the vehicle Victoria had been in on the night of the accident. The service date was 3 weeks before January. The service record showed a routine brake fluid flush and inspection. Standard, documented correctly. But the technician notation at the bottom, a handwritten line that someone had photographed for the filing, said, secondary pressure sensor flagged, deferred to next service per client request, a deferred pressure sensor, brake pressure sensor, per client request. Nathan sat in a parking structure on a Wednesday evening and looked at this for a long time. He thought about Marcus Webb. He knew the name because Miriam had mentioned it once, in passing, in the way you mention something you carry with you. Marcus Webb, 41, who had been driving for Victoria for 3 years, who had a wife and 2 children in Bronzeville, who had died on the Edens Expressway in January when the executive SUV had lost braking function on a rain-wet curve at highway speed and gone through the barrier. Nathan put his phone down. He pressed both hands flat on the steering wheel and breathed for a moment. Then he called Victoria. She picked up on the second ring. Nathan? I need to show you something. Not over the phone. Are you home? A pause. Yes. What is it? I'll explain when I get there. I can be there in 15 minutes. Another pause. Longer. Okay. He drove to Lincoln Park. He had the laptop with him and the photos he'd taken of his screen, the research organized in the order he'd found it because that order mattered. It showed a chain, not a conclusion he'd jumped to. Miriam let him up. Victoria was in the living room, the terrace door open to the June night, and the lavender plant was in the corner of the terrace doing exactly what Emma had predicted it would do. She was in her chair by the window. She looked at him when he came in and read something in his face immediately. How bad? She said. I don't know yet. I'm not a lawyer or an investigator, and everything I found is publicly available information, but... He put the laptop on the coffee table and opened it. Tell me if any of this means something to you. He walked her through it. The Vantage Fleet Services article. The incorporation record. Dale Pruitt. The timeline. The civil filing. The service record. The deferred pressure sensor notation. He laid it out in the same flat, ordered way he'd laid it out in his own head, without editorializing, without telling her what to think about it. Just the sequence. When he finished, the room was quiet. Victoria was looking at the laptop screen. Her hands were folded in her lap with the stillness of someone managing a physical response, keeping themselves controlled, because control is the thing they have left. Dale Pruitt left the company in October, she said. Her voice was very even. I didn't push him out. He resigned. At the time, Holloway had just come on as CFO and was restructuring some of the administrative functions. I didn't think much of it. October would be about 14 months before the accident. Yes. She looked at the incorporation date on the screen again. 14 months. He started the company almost immediately. Within a month of leaving. She was quiet. And Holloway awarded the contract in February, she said. After the accident. After Marcus. She stopped. Started again. After I was removed from active management. Yes. The maintenance contract for the same fleet that, yes. The room was very quiet. Outside, Chicago was doing its summer night thing. Distant traffic, a dog barking somewhere below, the sound of the lake if you knew how to listen for it. Someone deferred a brake pressure sensor, Victoria said, on the vehicle Marcus was driving, 3 weeks before January. That's what the record shows. Per client request. She looked at Nathan. The client would have been the fleet manager, or whoever was managing fleet decisions at the time, which was, I don't know the internal chain. That's where your attorney needs to go. Victoria put both hands on the arms of her wheelchair. She was gripping them. Not hard, just firmly. The grip of someone making sure they are physically located in the room, that the floor is still where it was. Marcus had 2 kids, she said. I know. His daughter's name is Amara. She was 9. His son is 12. She looked at the open terrace door. His wife called me in the hospital. When I was still, they let her speak to me for 3 minutes. She said Marcus talked about me like I was family. She said that like it was a comfort. Her voice cracked, once, precise and brief, and then it didn't. I've been sending them a monthly payment since February, anonymously. My attorney set it up. Nathan had not known this. What do I do? She said. It wasn't a request for advice exactly. It was the question you ask out loud when you've already started forming the answer and you need to hear the sound of your own voice saying the words. You take this to your attorney first thing tomorrow, Nathan said. Everything I found. Let her determine what's actionable and what the right next steps are. You don't move on Holloway without legal standing, and you don't give him any indication that you know what you know. And until then, act normal. Your schedule, your meetings, the board relationship you've been rebuilding, nothing changes on the surface. Nathan, she looked at him directly, if this is what it looks like, I know. They killed him, Marcus, to get me out of that company. He held her gaze. He didn't soften it. If the evidence holds, yes, that's what it looks like. Something moved through her face that was not grief and not rage, but some compound thing that didn't have a name. The particular expression of a person who has been living in a version of the story where they were the unfortunate victim of a terrible accident and has just been handed evidence that the story was something else entirely. I need a minute, she said. Take it. He went to the kitchen and got a glass of water and stood by the counter and looked at the terrace through the window. The lavender plant was a small purple shape in the dark. He thought about what he'd done, what he'd found, how he'd found it, whether he'd been right to bring it here tonight rather than sleeping on it another week. He decided he had been. The shape of it was too clear to sit on. She needed to know. He also thought he was her driver. He was not her friend, not her partner, not her family. And yet here he was in her kitchen at 9:30 on a Wednesday night, having just upended the story of her own life, and he was going to stay until she told him she was okay to be alone, and that was just what it was. After a few minutes, she called his name. He came back to the living room. She had her phone in her hand, already texting her attorney. He could tell from the look on her face. Active, purposeful. The quality she had when she was moving towards something rather than sitting inside it. I'm going to need the documentation you found, she said. I'll send it tonight. There are going to be other people involved in this. My attorney, possibly outside investigators, eventually law enforcement if the evidence holds. She looked at him. They're going to want to talk to you. That's fine. This will get complicated. Holloway has resources, and he will not take this quietly. She paused. I need you to know that before you commit to being part of this. He looked at her. You think I'm going to back off? I think it's a reasonable question. You have a daughter. You have a business you've built. This could get... People like Holloway have ways of making things difficult for people who involve themselves. Nathan was quiet for a moment. He thought about Marcus Webb. He thought about Amara and her 12-year-old brother. He thought about a brake pressure sensor deferred per client request. I found it, he said. I'm already in it. She looked at him for a long moment. Okay, she said. The thing about keeping secrets is that they require constant maintenance, and Nathan had never been especially good at performing normalcy. He didn't feel. What he managed was something slightly different. He was genuinely calm about most things, which read as normal from the outside. He drove. He kept the schedule. He had the coffee right, and the routes efficient, and the transition smooth. He told Emma nothing because there was nothing to tell her, and also because the version of the situation that was hers to know did not yet exist. But something had changed in the landscape, and he felt it. The following Monday, he received a call from a number he didn't recognize. He let it go to voicemail. The message was from a man who identified himself as representing a private business advisory firm, the kind of company that exists primarily to make other calls on behalf of other people. The man said there might be opportunities for Nathan to consider. A role adjustment, a financial arrangement. He said this with the particular smoothness of someone trained to make things that are essentially bribes sound like conversations. Nathan listened to the message twice. Then he texted Victoria's attorney. He had her number now, had used it twice in the past week, and sent her a copy of the voicemail audio. The attorney texted back within 4 minutes. Don't call back. Document everything. This is actually helpful. He deleted the contact from his recent calls and kept driving. The second contact came in person. He was in the parking structure below the Michigan Avenue building on a Wednesday afternoon, laptop open, working his mileage log in the 2-hour window between Victoria's internal meeting and her 4 p.m. site visit when someone knocked on the driver's side window. Nathan looked up. The man standing beside the car was in his late 40s, with the compact, carefully maintained look of someone who spent time in gyms and also in rooms where physical presence was a management tool. Nathan had seen him once before, in the lobby of the building 3 weeks ago, conferring quietly with the parking structure attendant. He lowered the window halfway. Nathan Cross, the man said. Not a question. Can I help you? I'm hoping we can have a brief conversation. The man's voice was controlled and pleasant in the way of someone accustomed to controlling rooms. About your employment situation. I'm employed. Situation's fine. I represent some individuals who believe your current position has some limitations in terms of your long-term interests. Nathan looked at him. What individuals? The man smiled, which told Nathan nothing except that he was practiced at this. I'm not in a position to say specifically. What I can say is that there are people in Miss Ellison's organization who believe the current structure, a private driver managing a CEO's access and schedule, creates some inefficiencies, and that they'd be prepared to offer a significant arrangement to allow a transition to a more structured access model. A significant arrangement. Financially significant, yes. We're talking about enough to allow you to expand your own business significantly. Maybe stop driving entirely, enough to think differently about your situation as a single father. He said it the way you use a thing deliberately. The single father detail placed in the sentence where it would do the most work. A statement about what they knew. A small, clean threat wearing the clothes of a benefit. Nathan felt something go very still in him. Not anger exactly. Something cooler and more focused than anger. I'm going to ask you to move away from my car, he said. Mr. Cross, I'm asking once. He said it without heat, which was more effective than heat would have been. I'd like you to move. The man looked at him for a moment with the assessment of someone recalculating. Then he stepped back from the window. He produced a business card from his jacket pocket and set it on the car's window ledge. Think about it, he said. Opportunity doesn't always offer itself twice. He walked away. Nathan watched him go, noted the direction, noted the car he got into at the far end of the structure. He picked up the business card by one edge, put it in the glove compartment with a receipt beneath it so he wasn't adding his own prints to any surface, and texted the make, model, and partial plate of the car to Victoria's attorney with a 3-line description of the conversation. The attorney called back in 10 minutes. Can you write down everything he said? As close to verbatim as you remember? Yes. Do that tonight. This is the second contact now. That's a pattern. We're getting close to something they want to stop. How close? Victoria's petition to the court for the internal investigation is filed for Friday. Once it's filed, the maintenance records and fleet contracts become part of a legal proceeding. Holloway's team probably knows it's coming. A pause. Be careful, Nathan. I mean that literally. Be physically careful. He sat with that for a moment. What about Victoria? She's got security. Has had it for 2 weeks. She didn't want to tell you yet because she didn't want you to feel... A pause. I think she didn't want you to worry. He thought about that. Victoria, managing the information he received about her own protection because she knew how he thought, knew he would factor it in, and she didn't want him factoring it in as his responsibility. I'm fine, he said, because that was what you said when the alternative was making someone else's fear your problem. Good, the attorney said. Friday. And Nathan, what you found 3 weeks ago, the service record, the Vantage connection. That's the spine of this case. You understand that? I understand. If they'd offered you more money or scared you more effectively, they didn't. No, she said. They didn't. A pause that felt like respect without being said as such. Friday. He put the phone down and sat in the parking structure. Through the gap at the end of the structure, he could see a slice of Lake Michigan, very blue in the afternoon light. He thought about Marcus Webb's daughter. He thought about Emma at the kitchen table doing homework, the sound of her pencil on the paper, the particular concentration on her face when she was working something out. He thought about Victoria 2 nights ago, her hands gripping the arms of her wheelchair with the carefully controlled strength of someone making sure the ground is still there. He had driven a lot of people. He had been in a lot of cars with a lot of versions of humanity. He knew that people, given the chance, were often smaller than they should be, that the gap between the self people presented and the self they actually were was usually larger than comfortable. He knew this about himself too. He had not been, in the 2 years since Claire, the full version of himself. He had been the functional version, the version that kept Emma housed and fed and known, that paid the bills and fixed the radiator and showed up when showing up was the whole job. It was not nothing, but it was not everything. Something about the last 6 months had been making him aware of the difference. He heard the elevator from the building interior open at the far end of the structure, and he looked up, and Victoria was coming through the door in the company of Miriam 45 minutes earlier than scheduled, which meant the meeting had ended early, which meant something had happened in the meeting. He got out of the car. She saw him immediately. She wheeled toward him with her face doing the thing it did when she had information that required reorganizing everything around it. He recognized it because he had seen it from the inside, wearing it himself 3 weeks ago in this same parking structure. "We need to talk," she said when she reached him. Miriam found something in the board minutes. "Okay." From October, right before Dale Pruitt resigned. She stopped in front of him. Her voice was controlled, but there was an edge underneath it, like a wire under pressure. There was a closed session vote. 3 board members, Holloway and 2 others. The minutes describe it as a vehicle fleet restructuring authorization. She paused. But the attachments to the minutes, which I had never seen because they were classified as administrative exhibits, describe a route modification protocol, standard language about optimizing executive travel. Nathan looked at her. "My route on the night of January 16th, she said, went through a specific section of the Edens because Miriam got an alert from a traffic management app about an incident on the standard route. She redirected Marcus based on that alert." A pause. "We checked the incident report this morning. There was no incident that night. The alert was a ghost. It came from a spoofed notification through an account created 11 days before the accident." The parking structure was very quiet. "They built the whole thing," Nathan said. It was not a question. "Someone built the whole thing," Victoria said. "The sensor deferral made the vehicle vulnerable. The fake traffic alert guaranteed the route. The wet weather—" She stopped. "Was just the wet weather," Nathan said. "Yes." She looked at him. "But everything else was arranged." The word came out wrong, which was the only word for it, the only honest word for what had been done. Marcus didn't die in an accident. Someone made a series of decisions that resulted in his death. She said it, and they stood in it. The full weight of what it was, without softening it. Without the comfortable language of tragedy that lets people off the hook of responsibility. "The court filing on Friday covers all of this?" Nathan asked. "It does now. Miriam's discovery changes the shape of it. My attorney has been on the phone for the last hour." She looked at him steadily. "There's enough. Nathan, there's enough." He nodded. "Are you—" He stopped. "Frightened?" She said the word he hadn't said. "Yes. I'm also something else." She looked at him with the clearest expression he had seen on her face in 6 months. Not the managed professional expression, not the careful bearing, just the actual face of a woman who has been given the worst possible version of the truth about something and has decided what to do with it. "I'm not backing away from this." "I know," Nathan said. "I need you to still be here for this. The next few weeks are going to be—" "I'm here," he said. She looked at him. He didn't say anything else, and neither did she for a moment. Then Miriam, who had been standing at a careful remove, said, "The 4 o'clock site visit is still on the schedule." Victoria looked at Nathan. "Are you ready?" He held the car door open. "I've been ready." She got in. He closed the door. He got in on the driver's side and pulled out of the parking structure and into the city, which kept moving around them the way cities do. Indifferent, enormous, the same Chicago it had been that morning and the morning before, not knowing or caring what it contained. Somewhere in the city, Adrian Holloway was in a room making calculations. Somewhere in Bronzeville, a woman named Ruth Webb was raising 2 children alone. Somewhere in a Lincoln Park condo, a lavender plant was on a terrace, alive. Nathan drove. The lake appeared on their left, the same blue as always, not caring what it reflected. Part 3. Louis, viết 4.000 đến 5.500 từ liên kết liên mạch với các phần trước trong câu chuyện. Phá hội thoại tạo thành một câu chuyện liên mạch khi ghép lại. Mỗi phần liên mạch với phần trước không giới thiệu lại câu chuyện ở đầu phần mới. Liên kết các phần của câu chuyện một cách liền mạch, sử dụng câu chuyện tiếp giữa các phần. Duy trì chủ đề, tránh ngắt quãng đột ngột, không sử dụng gạch đầu dòng hoặc tiêu đề phụ, phong cách kể chuyện Mỹ, Hoa Kỳ, giống văn giàu cảm xúc. Kể theo ngôi thứ 3, giữ độ kịch tính không viết lan man, nhân vật không hoàn hảo, hội thoại tự nhiên, tránh ngôn ngữ văn chương sáo rơi và cụm từ AI điển hình, viết như nhà văn chuyên nghiệp, không như AI cố gắng nghe sang. Có yếu tố con người cầm miêu tả qua mượt mà và hoàn hảo, kết thúc phần không giới thiệu phần sau, câu chuyện không nhắc đến Chúa. Lưu ý trả lời trong mục tin nhắn không nhảy sang document, chi dần bắt buộc, không được xuất hiện trong nội dung truyện. Đây là một câu chuyện điện ảnh hoàn toàn hư cấu được tạo ra chỉ nhằm mục đích giải trí. Không đề cập hay ngụ ý rằng nó dựa trên sự kiện có thật, người thật hoặc câu chuyện có thật. Không sử dụng các cụm từ như dựa trên một câu chuyện có thật, theo ghi chép hoặc bất cứ điều gì tương tự. Tất cả các nhân vật, địa điểm, tổ chức và sự kiện phải hoàn toàn hư cấu. Lưu ý đặc biệt quan trọng, nếu đạt đến giới hạn trả lời, không được dừng giữa câu, hãy viết nốt câu đó hoàn chỉnh, không mở rộng nội dung. Show more, I notice you've sent part 3 again. I already wrote part 3 in the previous response. It covered the board meeting aftermath, Nathan's discovery of the Vantage Fleet Services connection, the parking structure confrontation, and ended with Victoria and Nathan in the car after Miriam's discovery about the spoof traffic alert and the route manipulation. Would you like me to move forward and write part 4 now? The court filing went in on Friday at 11:42 in the morning. Nathan knew the exact time because Victoria texted him from inside her attorney's office. A single message, no words, just the timestamp and a period. He was in the car outside the building on Walker Drive, engine running, watching the Friday noon traffic build toward the weekend, and when the message came through, he sat with it for a moment before putting the phone back down. Something had been set in motion, the kind of thing that, once moving, could not be recalled. He drove Victoria home that afternoon in a silence that was different from all the previous kinds. Not working, not tired, not the settling dust of something significant. This was the silence of someone standing at the top of a long slope, having just let go of whatever they were holding, watching it begin to move. How long before they respond? He asked, somewhere on Lakeshore Drive. My attorney thinks Holloway's legal team will file a counter-motion within 72 hours. Standard delay tactic. But the maintenance records and the traffic alert data are already with the court. A counter-motion doesn't make those go away. She paused. The two board members who were in that closed session with Holloway, one of them called my attorney this morning, before the filing went in. To say what? To say he wanted to discuss his level of involvement, which means he's scared and he's looking for a door. She looked out at the lake. That's good, actually. That's very good. Because it means they're not unified. Because it means at least one of them will tell the truth if offered the right terms. She shifted in her seat. Holloway is the principal. The others were participants. Degrees of involvement vary. The board member who called, his name is Garrett, he knew about the fleet restructuring, but my attorney doesn't think he knew what it was actually for. He thought it was financial maneuvering. Holloway kept the operational details narrow. A pause. Which is how people like him work. They build the architecture and let other people stand in the rooms. So when the structure falls, the other people are holding the walls. And Holloway is where? Out of the country, she said, with a flatness that contained a specific frustration. Barcelona. He left Wednesday, before the filing. Nathan processed this. He knew. Someone told him it was coming. We don't know who yet. She turned from the window. But leaving the country before a court filing looks exactly as bad as it is. His attorneys are here. He's not. The optics of that won't help him. Nathan drove. He thought about the sequence of it. The years of planning that must have preceded January, the careful construction of Vantage Fleet Services, the cultivated relationship with Dale Pruitt, the closed session board vote dressed up as administrative routine, the deferred censor, the spoofed traffic alert, all of it requiring patience, planning, a long view. And then one wet highway in January and Marcus Webb was dead, and Victoria was in a hospital, and Adrian Holloway had a company to run. When does the board meeting happen? Nathan asked. My attorney is pushing for the emergency session within 2 weeks. Holloway's physical absence actually accelerates it. She can argue he's abandoned his fiduciary responsibilities. She was quiet for a moment. I need to be in that room, Nathan. I need to walk in there and close this myself. He looked at her in the rear view. You will be. I mean that literally, not in the chair. She said it with the careful precision of someone who has decided something and is saying it out loud for the first time to make it real. Dr. Chen says I'm close. We've been pushing the sessions. I can stand at the parallel bars for 4 minutes now. The walking it's not walking yet. It's controlled falling in a direction. But I want to walk into that room. He drove. He understood what she was saying, and he understood what it would cost her. And he understood that it wasn't about symbolism. It was about something more private and more fundamental than symbolism. It was about being in your own body in the room where someone tried to take everything from you, and being there on your own terms. Then we work toward that, he said. Check. The story broke on a Tuesday. Not the full story. Not yet. But a financial reporter at a Chicago business publication had clearly been tipped with enough of the outline to run a piece that described, in careful hedged language, questions surrounding Ellison Capital Group's internal governance and fleet management contracts during the period of Victoria's absence from active management. The piece named Adrian Holloway. It named Vantage Fleet Services. It did not yet name Dale Pruitt or describe the accident in anything other than passing terms, but it didn't need to. The shape of it was clear enough. Nathan read it at 6:15 in the morning before the first pickup. He texted Victoria, "Have you seen the Tribune piece?" Her response came in under a minute, which meant she'd been awake. "Yes." "Not us." Attorney thinks it's Garrett covering himself. He thought about this. The board member who had called to discuss his level of involvement, now quietly feeding the press enough to establish that he'd been peripheral, that the real decisions had been someone else's. "Does it help or hurt?" he texted. "Both. Holloway's team will use it to claim prejudicial publicity. But it also moves the timeline. The board session is being pushed to next Thursday. 6 days. How are you?" he typed, which was not a question he asked by text as a rule. A longer pause this time. "Working on it," she sent back. He put his phone in his pocket and went to work. The week that followed was the strangest week of Nathan's professional life. And his professional life had included 4 years of Army logistics in conditions that were not always stable. On the surface, it looked like any other week. He drove Victoria to PT on Monday and Wednesday and Friday. He drove her to the attorney's office twice. He drove her to the Michigan Avenue building for a working session with Miriam and the audit team on Thursday afternoon. He was on time, he had the coffee right, he took the routes that made sense. Underneath the surface, the week was a different thing entirely. On Monday evening, someone tried to access the building security system at Victoria's condo. The building security contractor flagged it as a sophisticated attempt. Not a random intrusion, something targeted. Nothing was breached. Victoria's security team, which she'd had in place for 3 weeks, upgraded the physical protocol. She told Nathan about this the following morning with the careful flatness of someone relaying information they've already processed and put in its proper place. "They're getting nervous," Nathan said. "Yes." "What do you need from me this week?" "Just what you've been doing." She paused. "Actually, can you stay late Thursday? After the attorney meeting, there's something I want to do and I'd rather have you driving." "What is it?" "I want to go to Bronzeville," she said. "I want to see Ruth Webb." He was quiet for a moment. "Have you been in contact with her before?" he asked. "Through my attorney. The payments. But I've never spoken to her directly. I've been afraid to." She said the word afraid without flinching, which was something that had changed about her over the past months. She'd gotten more precise about naming things accurately. "I think it's time." "Okay," he said. "Thursday. I'll be there." On Tuesday, Holloway's legal team filed the countermotion Nathan had been expecting. It was, from what Victoria's attorney described to Nathan in a 5-minute phone call, she had taken to calling him directly when she needed to relay information quickly, aggressive and specifically personal. It alleged that Victoria's petition was a bad faith action motivated by a desire to regain control of the company through legal intimidation rather than legitimate governance. It alleged irregularities in the audit process, and it included, as an exhibit, a series of photographs and a 2-paragraph statement describing Nathan Cross as an unauthorized individual who had accessed and shared proprietary company information, and suggesting that his role as Victoria's driver had evolved into a capacity that constituted a conflict of interest. Nathan read the filing summary on his phone in a parking structure, which was becoming the place where all significant information arrived. He called the attorney back. "What does this mean for the case?" "For the underlying case? Very little. The maintenance records and traffic alert data don't become less real because they allege your motivations were improper." She paused. "For you personally, it means Holloway's team is going to try to make you the story. An opportunistic driver who manipulated a vulnerable CEO. That's the narrative they'll push." He sat with that for a moment. The specific ugliness of it. The calculation behind it. "Victoria knows?" he asked. "She's the one who called me when the filing came through. She's not handling that part of it calmly." "I'll talk to her." "Nathan, Prepare yourself for the possibility that this gets worse before it gets better. They will dig into your background, your finances, your army record, your marriage. A pause. People like Holloway don't lose quietly. I know, he said. He called Victoria. She picked up on the first ring. I saw it, he said. I'm sorry. Her voice was tight. I'm sorry, Nathan. This is because of me. No, he said, and he meant it simply and completely. This is because of him. None of what he's doing is because of you. I put you in this position. I found the documents. I chose to bring them to you. I chose to stay. He kept his voice level. I don't need you to feel guilty about this. What I need is for you to stay focused on Thursday. A silence. They're going to say things about you, she said. In public, things that aren't true. Let them. I know what's true about me. Nathan, Victoria. He stopped, started again. I've had people try to define me before. It doesn't stick if you don't help it stick. Focus on Thursday. The silence on the phone had a particular quality. He'd learned to read her silences even over the phone now. I don't know what I would have done if you'd taken the money, she said quietly. When that man came to your car. I didn't. I know. She stopped. Thank you for not being that kind of person. He looked at the slice of lake visible from the parking structure. Same blue. Always the same blue. Drive safe, he said, which was a strange thing to say to someone who wasn't driving, but she understood it. See you tomorrow morning, she said. Thursday arrived the way important days do, by being, first, just a morning. Nathan woke at 4:47, which was habit now, and not the alarm. He lay in the dark for a moment and thought about what the day was going to ask of the people in it. Then he got up and made coffee and wrote Emma's note and went to work. The attorney meeting was at 10. Nathan drove Victoria there and waited in the car. 3 hours, the longest wait of the contract, during which he finished his mileage log for the month, called his father in Michigan for the first time in 6 weeks, and sat with the particular quality of a Thursday morning in July in Chicago, the heat already building off the pavement, the lake invisible from this block, but present the way it was always present in this city, felt, if not seen. His father asked how the job was going. Nathan said fine. His father, who had the specific radar of a parent who knows their child's voice, asked if everything was all right. Yeah, Nathan said. There's just some things happening. It's fine. The girl, his father said. Not a question. Nathan was quiet for a moment. It's complicated. It's always complicated, his father said. Complicated is not the same as wrong. Nathan looked out the windshield at the street. I know. Emma likes her? Emma loves her. Emma decided this about 30 seconds into the first meeting. His father made a sound that was something between a laugh and an acknowledgement. Emma's got good instincts, like her mother. Yeah, Nathan said. She does. They talked for another 10 minutes about nothing in particular. His father's garden, the weather in Michigan, whether the Cubs were going to do anything worth watching this season. And then Nathan said he had to go, and his father said, take care of yourself, and Nathan said, I will, and neither of them said the thing underneath the conversation, which was that it was good to hear each other's voices and that some things didn't require saying. Victoria came through the building doors at 1:50. Nathan watched her come through the lobby, and he could read it from 50 feet away. The meeting had gone well, not perfectly, but the right kind of well. She got in the car. The board session is confirmed for next Thursday, she said. 10 a.m., full board. My attorney will present the evidentiary package. Holloway is flying back from Barcelona. His attorneys apparently told him his absence was making things materially worse. A pause. Garrett has agreed to cooperate fully. He's retained separate counsel. And Pruitt? The FBI has been in contact with him. His attorney reached out to mine yesterday. He's talking. She said it without satisfaction, just the fact of it. He says the brake sensor deferral was authorized verbally by Holloway, that he was told it was a temporary measure, that the vehicle would be pulled from service before it mattered. He says he didn't know about the traffic alert. He says he didn't think anyone would be hurt. But someone was. But Marcus is dead. She said it the way she'd said it in her apartment, directly, with the full weight of the words, not allowing the passive construction to soften it. Pruitt will spend the rest of his life knowing that he deferred a brake sensor on a car that killed a man Because Adrian Holloway told him it would be fine. She was quiet. I don't know if that's justice. It's something. Nathan drove south toward Bronzeville. The city changed texture as they moved through it. The commercial density of the loop giving way to the south side neighborhoods. The particular human geography of Chicago becoming more residential, more specific, more its own thing. Are you sure about this? He asked. No, she said, but I'm doing it anyway. Ruth Webb lived in a brick two-flat on a tree-lined street in Bronzeville with a front porch that had a planter on each side of the steps. Marigolds, yellow and orange, well-tended. Nathan parked at the curb. He came around and helped with the transfer without being asked because the sidewalk had a slight incline that he'd noted on the approach, and she let him without the usual brief resistance, which told him something about where she was. They had called ahead. Ruth knew they were coming. She opened the door before they reached the porch steps. She was in her early 40s, a compact woman with the specific composure of someone who has been living at close range with grief for 6 months and has found a way to carry it without being destroyed by it. She looked at Victoria, and something passed between them. Not recognition exactly, since they'd never met, but something mutual. An acknowledgement. Ms. Ellison, she said. Ruth. Victoria stopped at the base of the porch steps. She looked up at her. I'm sorry that it took me this long to come. Ruth Webb looked at her for a moment. Come inside, she said. Nathan waited on the porch. This was not his conversation, not his room to be in. He sat on the porch steps in the July afternoon and listened to the street. Kids somewhere on the block, a lawnmower 2 houses down, a radio playing something he couldn't quite identify. He thought about Marcus Webb driving an executive SUV on a wet highway in January, not knowing that the route had been arranged, not knowing about the sensor. He thought about the specific cruelty of a death that was disguised as an accident. The way it left people with a story that didn't account for the actual thing that had happened. The conversation inside was 40 minutes. Nathan didn't know what was said. When Victoria came back to the door, Ruth Webb was with her. And Ruth Webb was not crying, but she had the particular expression of someone who has been carrying something alone and has just for the first time set it down in a shared space. The payments, Ruth said to Victoria, standing in the doorway. The anonymous ones. I knew it was you. I should have told you, Victoria said. I wasn't ready to say it out loud. What happened to him? Ruth looked at her for a moment. He would have liked you, she said. He always talked about you, said you were straight with people. A pause. Amara asked sometimes what Marcus would think of things. I'm going to tell her he'd think you were doing right. Victoria was quiet. Nathan watched from the steps. I'm going to make sure there's a full account, Victoria said. Legally, publicly, his name is not going to stay attached to the word accident. A pause. I promise you that. Ruth Webb nodded. She looked at Nathan briefly. A look that was measuring and then settled. You're the one who found it, she said. The records. Yes, Nathan said. She looked at him for a long moment. Thank you, she said. The same 2 words, the same weight, the same directness that Victoria had used weeks ago. He didn't know what to say except he deserved better than what happened to him. Yes, Ruth Webb said. He did. They drove back north in a silence that was full rather than empty. The city moved around them. The lake appeared again on the left. The late afternoon light doing the copper thing it did over Chicago in July. She's remarkable, Victoria said after a while. Yes. I don't know how people do that. Survive something like that and remain. She stopped. She's still in there, fully. Some people aren't, after. I've seen it. They go somewhere and they don't come all the way back. Nathan thought about what that meant coming from her. You came back, he said. She looked at the lake. I had help. He said nothing. He drove. The week between that Thursday and the following Thursday was the longest week Nathan could remember since the week after Claire died, and it was long in a different way. Not the numb, dissociated length of grief, but the taut, electric length of waiting for something enormous that you have done everything you can to prepare for, and now simply have to let arrive. Victoria went to PT every day, not because Dr. Chen had scheduled every day, but because Victoria had added sessions herself and doctor. Chen, who Nathan had developed a complete professional respect for without ever meeting, had apparently looked at her patient and understood that this was not a request to be declined. On Tuesday, she walked 12 steps with a forearm crutch. Nathan was not there. He heard about it in the car on Tuesday afternoon, delivered in the same tone she'd used to describe the 40 seconds at the parallel bars. Careful, non-triumphant, aware of the distance still remaining. 12 steps, he said. Uneven. The right side is still catching. Dr. Chen says it'll be weeks before it's reliable without the crutch. But 12 steps. Yes. A pause. Yes. 12 steps. How did it feel? She was quiet for a moment. He thought she might deflect it, the way she sometimes deflected the questions that got too close to the center of something. Like the parking structure in Northwestern Memorial, she said, but without the crying. He looked at her in the rear view. She was looking out the window, but there was something in the line of her face. Something that had changed since the day he'd picked her up in the lobby of her building in February. Something that wasn't there in the controlled, defensive bearing of those first months. She looked, he thought, like herself. Whatever that meant. Like the actual version. The full version. The one that had been reassembling itself in pieces across 6 months of early mornings and PT sessions and long drives and late evening conversations in a Lincoln Park living room. You should tell Emma, he said, about the steps. She's been asking about the lavender plant every week. She's been managing the tracking of both things. Victoria smiled. A real one. Not the managed almost smile, but the one that still caught him slightly off guard because it changed her face entirely. She has a system, Nathan said. I don't fully understand it. It involves a notebook. Tell her both things are doing well, Victoria said. The night before the board meeting, Nathan couldn't sleep. This was not unusual. He'd slept badly since January, since the shape of the situation had taken on its current weight. He lay in the dark and listened to the city and thought about the morning. He thought about Victoria preparing whatever she was preparing across the city in Lincoln Park. He thought about Adrian Holloway, back from Barcelona now, somewhere in the city in whatever room people like him occupied the night before. Everything they had built began to come down. At 2:14 a.m., his phone buzzed, a text from Victoria. Are you awake? He looked at it for a moment. Yes, he typed. I keep thinking about the route she sent, the one they built for Marcus that night. The fake alert, rerouting him to the Edens, a pause, a typing indicator. Then he trusted the information he was given. He made the best decision he could with what he had. That's all any of us can do. Nathan lay in the dark and read this. Yes, he typed. That's right. I'm going to walk into that room tomorrow, she sent. I don't care if it's 6 steps or 12 or if I need the crutch. I'm walking in. I know, he typed. I'm not scared, she sent. Then almost immediately, that's not true. I'm scared, but I'm going anyway. He looked at that for a moment in the dark of his bedroom, the city doing its 2 a.m. thing outside. Emma asleep down the hall. That's the only way it works, he typed. Scared and going anyway. A long pause. Thank you, Nathan. Then, before he could respond, for all of it. Not just tonight. All of it. He held the phone and thought about what to say and settled on the thing that was most true. Get some sleep, he typed. I'll be there at 8. Her response was a single period, which was, he had come to understand, Victoria Ellison's version of a smile. He put the phone down. Outside the window, Chicago was doing what it always did. Moving, breathing, indifferent and enormous, not knowing or caring about the things it contained. He lay in the dark and waited for morning. He was at her building at 7:52. She came through the lobby at 7:59, which was the most precisely she had ever been on time, which told him everything about the state she was in. She was in the chair. She was dressed in a charcoal blazer and dark trousers, the same combination as the first day, he noticed, which he suspected was not an accident. She had the forearm crutch across her lap. She looked at him when she came through the door. He held it. Ready? He said. She looked at the car, looked back at him. There were shadows under her eyes that told him she had not slept much better than he had. I walked to the elevator, she said, from my bedroom, with the crutch. 8 steps. Good. It's not enough to walk into the room. You'll have more by 10 o'clock, he said. You've been adding 2 or 3 steps a day. She looked at him. I've been paying attention, he said. She got in the car. He closed the door. He got in on the driver's side and pulled out into the July morning and drove her toward Michigan Avenue, toward the 42nd floor, toward the room where the people who had tried to take everything from her were waiting. The lake was to their right on Lake Shore Drive, very blue in the morning light, the same lake it had always been. Emma had been right about it, Nathan thought. It was the best one, because you could see it, because it was there. He drove. He had her at the building at 8:41. He waited in the car in the parking structure. The same structure, the same concrete, the slice of lake visible at the far end. And he worked on nothing, thought about nothing specific, just sat in the specific quality of a summer morning and waited. At 10:47, his phone buzzed. A text from Miriam. She walked in, both board members cooperating, Holloway's attorneys requesting a recess. It's going the right way. At 11:23, another text from Miriam. Recess over. Victoria is presenting. You should see her. At 1:04 p.m., Victoria called. He picked up on the first ring. It's done, she said. Her voice was steady, but at the edges of it was something that had been held tightly for a very long time and was now, cautiously, beginning to release. The board voted. Holloway is removed, effective immediately. The FBI liaison was in the building. He was escorted out. Nathan sat in the parking structure and held the phone. Are you okay? He asked. A pause. Long enough that he counted it. I don't know yet, she said. I think so. I think I will be. Another pause. I walked in, Nathan. 11 steps from the elevator to the boardroom door with the crutch, and then I handed the crutch to Miriam, and I walked to my chair without it. He closed his eyes for a moment. How many steps? He asked. 4, she said. And then she made the sound that was not quite a laugh, but had crossed over this time into being fully one, real and a little unsteady, and completely itself. 4 very uneven steps. I nearly went into the conference table. But you made it. I made it. A pause. Come up. I need to sign some things, and then I want to go home. I want to see the terrace. I'll be at the entrance in 3 minutes, he said. He started the car. He pulled out of the parking structure and into the July afternoon, and Chicago was around him, enormous and indifferent, and full of the small, ordinary machinery of people getting through their days, and the lake was to the east, always to the east, doing exactly what it had always done. He drove toward the building entrance. He was 3 minutes away, which was exactly what he'd said, which was the only promise he ever made because it was the only kind he knew for certain he could keep. The weeks after the board meeting did not feel like victory. Nathan had expected, not consciously, but somewhere in the background assumption of how things worked, that when the thing ended, it would feel like an ending, clean, resolved, the way a door sounds when it fully closes. What he found instead was that the aftermath of something enormous is not clean at all. It's paperwork, it's phone calls. It's the specific exhaustion of people who have been running on adrenaline and urgency for months, and who now have to figure out how to function without it. The FBI investigation opened formally the week after the board meeting. Holloway was charged, fraud, conspiracy, and a third charge related to criminal negligence that his attorneys were fighting with everything they had. Dale Pruitt cooperated fully, which the prosecutor's office confirmed would be reflected in his eventual sentencing. The 2 board members who had been in the closed session faced civil liability proceedings. Garrett, the one who had called Victoria's attorney, was cooperating and had resigned from the board with what his own press statement called deep regret, which Nathan read about in a parking structure and thought was probably the most honest 2 words the man had produced in years. The press covered it in waves. The first wave was the charges themselves. The financial fraud angle was the one that got the most column inches because financial fraud was legible and had clear villains and a clear dollar amount attached. The second wave was the accident, when the full picture of what had been done to Marcus Webb's route became public. This wave was harder to read about. It was also more important, and Nathan thought Victoria felt that too. The difference between a story about corporate crime and a story about a man who died because someone decided his life was an acceptable operational cost. Victoria gave one interview. A single sit-down with a Chicago journalist whose work Nathan had read and respected, conducted in Victoria's office, published 3 weeks after the board meeting. She talked about Marcus. She talked about the investigation. She did not talk about herself in the way that public figures usually talk about themselves. No narrative of resilience. No language about her journey. She talked about what had been done and who had done it and what she intended to do about it. And at the end of the interview, she said plainly that she hoped the people who had arranged Marcus Webb's death would spend the rest of their lives understanding exactly what they had arranged. The journalist wrote that she said this without anger, which was the most frightening part. Nathan read the interview in his car on a Wednesday morning and thought, yes, that's her. The formal establishment of the Marcus Webb Foundation happened in September. Victoria had been working on it since July, with the same methodical precision she brought to everything: the legal structure, the funding mechanism, the scope of what the foundation would do. She'd consulted Ruth Webb at every stage, which was not a courtesy, but a genuine collaboration. The foundation would provide financial support for families of workers killed in corporate negligence incidents, with a secondary focus on legal resources for families navigating wrongful death claims against entities with vastly more resources than they had. Nathan drove Victoria to the foundation's formal registration meeting at a law firm in the Loop on a Thursday afternoon in early September. When they pulled up to the building, she sat in the car for a moment before getting out. "Ruth is already upstairs," she said. "I know. Miriam texted." Victoria looked at the building entrance. "I've been thinking about what Marcus would make of all of this. The foundation, his name on it." She paused. "I didn't know him well enough. I knew he was reliable and careful, and that he'd been with the company 3 years, and that Miriam trusted him, which meant something. I should have known him better." "You have time to know his children," Nathan said. She looked at him. "Amar is 9, he said. His son is 12. They're going to grow up. There's a lot of time ahead of them that you could be part of, if Ruth is willing and you are." Victoria was quiet for a moment. "Emma told me that last week," she said, "that Amara was the same age she was when her mother died, that she remembered being 9. Nathan felt something shift in his chest. That particular movement that happened sometimes when Emma's capacity for understanding exceeded what he thought she had access to. "She said that to you?" "We had a long conversation when you left us in the kitchen to answer Miriam's call." A pause. "Your daughter is—" Nathan, she is extraordinary. You know that." "I know," he said. "She told me she still talks to Claire sometimes. Not praying," she was careful to say, "just talking, like leaving a message." Victoria's voice was quiet. "She said she told Claire about me, that she thought Claire would have liked me." He looked at the steering wheel. He looked at his hands on it, the same hands that had been in this car for 8 months, holding this wheel, driving this woman through the city in every kind of silence and weather and state of being. "She would have," he said. It came out rougher than he intended. Victoria reached forward, a gesture he didn't expect, reaching across the space between the front and back seat, and put her hand briefly on his shoulder. Not with the meaning of something declared, just with the meaning of presence, of being in the same space with someone and letting them know you're there. She took her hand back. She opened the door. "Walk me in?" she said. He got out and came around, and she was already standing, using the door frame for the first transition, then straightening, then walking the 4 steps to the curb under her own power. No crutch today. She still moved carefully, still had the slight catch on the right side that Dr. Chen said would continue to improve, possibly for another year, possibly longer. She was not the woman who had run 6 miles along the lakefront every morning. She was also not the woman who had needed 40 seconds at the parallel bars to feel like progress. She was something in between, which is where most people actually live, Nathan thought. Not in the before or the after, but in the difficult, specific territory of the during. He walked her into the building. At the elevator, he stopped. "I'll be in the car," he said. She looked at him. "You could come up." "It's your meeting, yours and Ruth's." He pressed the elevator button for her. "I'll be in the car." She stepped into the elevator. She looked at him as the doors closed. A long look, steady and complicated, and without the managed professional distance that had characterized every look she'd given him for the first 3 months. The look of someone who has stopped managing their expression around a particular person because the effort required has stopped feeling necessary. The doors closed. He went back to the car and sat in the September afternoon and thought about nothing and everything, which was his usual way of thinking about the things he wasn't ready to think about directly. Emma started 3rd grade in September, which came with a new teacher, a new classroom, and an intense and detailed set of opinions about both that she delivered to Nathan every evening with the authority of a field correspondent filing reports from a developing situation. Her teacher was named Mr. Alvarez and he was tall and had a classroom full of plants and had already, in the first 2 weeks of school, become one of Emma's 3 favorite adults in the world, the other 2 being Nathan and Victoria. In that order, though, Emma was diplomatic about saying so directly. It was Emma who moved things, in the end. Not with intention. Emma was 7, going on 8, and her intentions were largely limited to specific outcomes she wanted in her immediate environment. She moved things the way children sometimes do, by simply acting from the part of herself that hadn't learned yet to be strategic about it. It was a Saturday in early October, the first genuinely cold Saturday of the year, and they were at Victoria's condo. This had become, over the past 2 months, a semi-regular Saturday occurrence. Not every week, not formally planned, more the organic result of the fact that Victoria's place was close to the farmer's market Emma had decided she required, and that Emma had opinions about the terrace that she felt obligated to share in person, and that Nathan had stopped finding reasons to structure it otherwise. The lavender plant had survived the summer and was now in the slightly uncertain territory of a Chicago autumn, and Emma had researched this online and printed out a page about winterizing lavender, which she had brought in her backpack and was now presenting to Victoria with the seriousness of someone delivering a briefing. "You have to cut it back," Emma said, "but not too much. Like this." She pointed to a diagram that she had annotated in pencil. "And then you put mulch around the bottom for insulation." "Where do I get mulch?" Victoria asked. "The garden center in Wilmette, probably. Or there's one closer on Western." Emma considered. "My dad knows where it is." "Does your dad know about lavender winterizing?" "He looked it up with me," Emma said, with the specificity of a child attributing credit accurately. "He didn't know it before." Victoria looked at Nathan over Emma's head. He was standing near the kitchen counter doing what he did in this apartment, which was existing in the space with the quality of someone who had learned its geography, where the good coffee was, which drawer the scissors were in, that the heating vent near the terrace door ran hot and would dry out flowers if you weren't careful. "I'll take her to the garden center next week," he said. "We can get the mulch." Victoria looked at him for a moment. "You don't have to—" "I know," he said. She looked at him for another moment. Then Emma pulled her attention back to the winterizing diagram, and the moment moved forward. But later, when Emma had fallen asleep on the couch, under the blanket that had appeared on Victoria's couch sometime in August and had not moved since, and Nathan was washing the coffee cups in the kitchen because Victoria's housekeeper didn't come until Monday, and he had the habit of not leaving things, Victoria came to the kitchen doorway. She stood there, standing, no chair today, one hand on the door frame for the casual support that was now habit rather than necessity, and looked at him. "Nathan," she said. "Yeah. I need to ask you something, and I need you to actually answer it." He turned off the water and dried his hands. He turned around and looked at her. "Okay. What are we doing?" The question sat in the kitchen between them. He looked at her and she looked at him, and neither of them was going to pretend it wasn't a real question or that they hadn't both been holding it at arm's length for a while. "I don't know exactly," he said. "That's not an answer. It's an honest answer." She looked at him with the expression she used when she was deciding whether to accept technically accurate information as sufficient. "I'm not asking you to define everything. I'm asking if this is something you want, whatever this is." She paused. "Because I have very little experience with— I'm not good at this. The personal version. I was engaged for 2 years to a man who left me in the hospital, and I missed every signal because I was too busy to notice them, and I don't—" She stopped. "I don't trust my own reading of situations like this, so I'm asking directly." He thought about this. He thought about the way he'd looked forward to the morning drives for so long that it had stopped registering as unusual. He thought about the parking structure in Northwestern Memorial and his father's voice on the phone and the way Emma had filed her report about talking to Claire. He thought about a lavender plant on a terrace that was still alive because someone had paid attention to it. "I want to do this right," he said, "whatever that means. I'm not going to tell you what I want and then not show up for it. I've had enough in my life of things that said one thing and did another." "That's not what I asked." "I know." He looked at her. "Yes, this is something I want. I don't know the shape of it yet, but yes." She looked at him for a long moment. Some of the careful management went out of her face. The last of it, the final layer of it, the part she'd maintained even in the months when most of the other layers had already come down. "Okay," she said. "Me too." She didn't move toward him, and he didn't move toward her, which was exactly right for who they both were. People who moved carefully, who had been hurt by the speed of things before, who understood that something worth having was worth approaching with care. "Okay," he said. She looked at Emma asleep on the couch, with the slight, complicated expression of someone encountering something that catches them off guard by how much it means to them. "She's going to be insufferable when she finds out she was right," she said. "She's been right about things since she was 4, Nathan said. "She knows it. I've mostly stopped trying to suggest otherwise." Victoria made the sound that had fully become a laugh months ago, real and a little unsteady and entirely itself. And in the other room, Emma slept on, deeply and untroubled, one arm hanging over the edge of the couch in the same position she'd slept in since she was a baby, not knowing and not needing to know what was happening in the kitchen. November came in cold and clear, which was the best version of Chicago November. Not the gray grinding kind, but the bright sharp kind where the air had an edge and the lake went a deep steel blue and the city looked clean and serious from a distance. The trees on the lakefront path were bare, but the path was busy. It was always busy. Chicago people had a complicated relationship with the outdoors, treating it as both an ordeal and a point of pride, walking briskly in coats that were almost but not quite adequate, as if to prove something. Victoria went back to the lakefront path for the first time since before the accident on a Saturday morning in early November. She had not planned to make it significant. Nathan suspected she had told herself it was just a practical route choice. The path was accessible, the weather was acceptable. She wanted to be outside. He didn't examine the explanation too closely. She had a right to her own reasons. He parked on Fullerton and they went to the path together. Nathan walking, Victoria on the manual chair, moving herself the way she always moved herself. Emma was at a birthday party for a classmate, which meant it was just the two of them, which had become, over the past month, an increasingly normal and unremarkable state of affairs. The lake was enormous and steel blue and cold-looking, and the city was behind them to the west, and the path stretched north and south with the usual Saturday morning population: joggers, cyclists, dog walkers. A man with a very large camera pointed at the skyline. Victoria stopped the chair at the railing at the edge of the path. She looked out at the water. Nathan stood beside her and looked at it too. After a while, she said, "I used to start my run at the Fullerton underpass. I'd go south to the pier and back, 7 miles usually. I had a playlist that I never changed because I was superstitious about it." A pause. "The playlist is still on my phone. I haven't listened to it." "You could put it on now," he said. "It would be wrong. The context is wrong." She looked at the water. "I'm not running. This isn't the same thing." "It doesn't have to be the same thing to be worth having." She was quiet. "I keep waiting to feel like myself again," she said. "The self I was before. And I think—" She stopped. "I think that self is not coming back. The one who ran 7 miles every morning and slept 4 hours and didn't have a lavender plant, and thought that being good at business was the whole point of being alive." She said this without grief, which was how he knew she had worked through the grief of it already, in the months of PT and early mornings and difficult drives. "I don't think I want that self back, actually. I just don't fully know who this one is yet." "You've got time to figure it out," Nathan said. "How long did it take you?" "After Claire." He thought about it honestly, which was the only way he answered questions she asked directly. "I'm still figuring it out," he said. "I think that's normal. I think the people who tell you they've got themselves fully figured out are either lying or they've stopped paying attention." She looked up at him. "The part that matters," he said, "is that you're still asking the question. People who stop asking it, that's when things go wrong. You're still asking it." She looked back at the lake. The wind off the water was cold and sharp and real. "I'm going to walk to the underpass," she said. He looked at her. The Fullerton underpass was about 200 yards south along the path. On flat pavement, with no crutch. On a good day, 200 yards was possible. On a cold morning, with the residual stiffness she always had until she'd been moving for a while, it was a significant ask. "I'm coming with you," he said. "I know," she said. She stood up from the chair. He held it. She didn't take his arm. She didn't need it, and he had learned exactly where the line was between being present and getting in the way. And he respected that line with the same care he brought to everything involving her. She straightened. She put her shoulders back in the way she always did, the deliberate posture that was both habit and decision. She started walking. It was slow. It was uneven. The right side still catching slightly, the rhythm still not fully her own. She had to concentrate in the way that people who relearn to walk always have to concentrate, which takes the ease out of it, makes it work rather than movement. 3 people passed them going north. A dog sniffed at Nathan's hand and its owner pulled it away apologetically. The city was behind them and the lake was beside them, and the underpass was getting closer. She reached it. She put one hand on the concrete of the underpass wall, not for support, just for contact. She stood there for a moment, breathing. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he said. They stood in the shadow of the underpass for a moment. The path went on south, the lake went on east, the city went on west. Everything kept going, which was both the best and the most difficult thing about the world. "Let's go back," she said. He brought the chair. She sat. They went back north along the path the way they'd come. And she didn't say anything, and he didn't say anything, and that was exactly right. There are things you understand about a person's life that cannot be transmitted secondhand. You can describe the facts of Nathan Cross's situation, and the facts would be accurate. A 32-year-old single father who drove for a living and paid attention, and once found a document in a public court filing that helped dismantle something that had looked from the outside like an accident but was not. The facts are accurate, but they don't carry the weight of what it actually costs to be that person. The sleep he didn't get, the calculations he ran every month about whether the numbers worked, the specific loneliness of being very good at holding things together and having almost nobody to tell that to. He had spent 2 years as the functional version of himself, not the hollow version, not the version that had given up. Nathan was constitutionally incapable of giving up on the things that mattered to him, which was maybe his best quality and also the thing that had exhausted him most. But the full version, the one that allowed himself to be surprised, to look forward to something for reasons that weren't practical, to admit that being alone was not the same as being fine, that version had been in suspension. He'd known it, somewhere. Known it the way you know things about yourself that you're not ready to do anything about yet. Victoria Ellison had not fixed this. He wanted to be precise about that because it mattered. She had not fixed him, and he had not fixed her. And anyone who tells you that another person healed them entirely is leaving out the part where they did most of the work themselves. She had been in the car, and he had been in the car, and over hundreds of drives through a city that kept moving regardless of what was happening inside a dark gray SUV, something had shifted in the landscape of who he was allowing himself to be. That was the truth of it. Imprecise and incomplete and real. Christmas came, and it was, by Nathan's previous December standards, loud. Victoria had not grown up celebrating Christmas in any particular way. Her family's relationship with the holiday had been, as she described it, largely performative and largely exhausting. Nathan and Emma have their own version. A tree from the lot on Clark Street, ornaments that Emma had been adding to since she was 3, and that therefore represented an aesthetic that could be generously described as eclectic, specific foods that Claire had made and that Nathan had learned to approximate over the years. The same 2 Christmas movies watched in the same order on Christmas Eve. This year, Victoria was there for all of it. Not because Nathan had asked her to move in, or because anything had been formally decided. They were moving slowly, which was right, which was how both of them needed to move given the particular histories they carried. But she was there for the tree, and she had brought, without being asked, a new ornament, a small silver wheel, which was Nathan's symbol from Emma's system, which meant she had been paying attention to things Emma had told her, which meant Emma had been talking. When Nathan saw the ornament, he looked at Emma. Emma looked at the ceiling with the expression of someone who has done exactly what she intended to do and sees no reason to apologize for it. "She knew about the wheel?" Nathan said to Emma. "I told her," Emma said. "She needed one." Victoria was hanging the ornament on the tree with the concentration of someone who had not done this in a long time and was taking it seriously. She looked up at Nathan. "Is that all right?" He looked at the small silver wheel on the tree. He thought about the drawing he put on Emma's notes, the running joke that had started when Emma was 5 and thought it was funny that her father's whole job was the wheel. He thought about Claire, who had been the one to establish the note-leaving system, who had believed in the specific power of small, consistent gestures. He thought about Emma deciding that Victoria needed to be part of this particular private language. "Yeah," he said, "that's exactly right." Emma looked satisfied. Victoria went back to the tree. Nathan watched them both for a moment. His daughter and this woman who had come into their lives through a contracted work arrangement and had not left, who was standing in his living room hanging an ornament she'd chosen carefully, who was still figuring out who she was and would be for a while yet, which was fine, which was honest, which was the only version of a person worth actually knowing. He went to the kitchen to finish making dinner. He could hear them in the other room, Emma explaining her ornament system with the details she brought to things she cared about, and Victoria asking questions that were real questions, not the performative questions of adults humoring children. The kitchen smelled like the food he was making and the cold coming in under the door and the tree in the other room. He stood at the stove and thought, this is what it looks like. Not a resolved version, not a finished version. The actual ongoing version, with all its difficulty and improvisation and days when the numbers don't work and the back hurts and you didn't get enough sleep and you still have to show up. This is what it looks like when it's real. He was grateful for it in the specific, complicated way you are grateful for things that cost something. Not uncomplicated gratitude. There was still Claire, always Claire, who was present in this kitchen in every system Nathan had learned from her and kept. There was still the weight of what had happened to Marcus Webb and what it had taken to surface it, and the fact that the legal process was still grinding forward and would be for months. There were still mornings when Emma asked questions Nathan didn't have answers to, and evenings when Victoria went quiet in a way that meant she was somewhere he couldn't reach, and the ordinary accumulating difficulty of two people trying to build something careful and honest out of what they'd both survived. But here, in the kitchen, with the sound of his daughter's voice in the other room, explaining the significance of the ornament with the stuffed dog on it to a woman who was listening with her whole attention, here was something. It was enough. It was more than enough. On a Sunday in February, a year, almost to the week, since Nathan had walked into the lobby of Victoria's building for the first time, the three of them went to the lakefront. Emma's idea characteristically delivered not as a request, but as a schedule item. We're going to the lake Sunday. No argument was expected or entertained. It was cold, the way Chicago February is cold. Not dangerously, but insistently, the kind of cold that gets into your coat no matter how good the coat is. The lake was gray-green and restless. The path was mostly empty, which meant Emma could run, which she did, ranging ahead and then coming back and then ranging ahead again like a border collie with a specific and self-appointed job. Victoria walked. Not the full distance. Her range was still being built, still imprecise in the way that recovery is imprecise, better some days than others, without a logic that satisfied her. But she walked from the Fullerton entrance south past the chess pavilion, past the spot where Leonard's hot dog cart would reappear in April, past the place where Emma had once explained the engineering principles of tall buildings to a stranger who had turned out to be not exactly a stranger. Nathan walked beside her. They were close enough that their coats occasionally touched when the path narrowed, which happened more than the path's actual width required. Emma came running back from 20 yards ahead. "There's a dog," she reported. "A big one. The owner says I can pet it if I ask. Can I ask?" "Yes," Nathan and Victoria said at the same time. Emma ran back toward the dog with the confidence of someone who has received authorization and intends to use it fully. Victoria watched her go. The lake was large and gray beside them, and the city was behind them, and the cold was the specific clean cold of February that is its own difficult version of beautiful. "She's going to ask for a dog by March," Victoria said. "She's been asking for a dog since she was 4, Nathan said. "She has a whole rotating strategy for it. Last year, it was the responsibility argument. The year before, it was the emotional support angle. What do you think she'll try this year?" "I genuinely don't know. She's been doing research." He paused. "I'm worried she's going to find a data angle." Victoria laughed. The real one, the full one. The laugh that had taken months to come all the way out and was now just how she laughed. A little unsteady, completely itself. Down the path, Emma was crouched beside a large, enthusiastic dog, explaining something to it with the seriousness of someone making a case. The dog appeared to be listening. Nathan looked at the lake. He thought about the drive on Lakeshore Drive in early May, when he'd taken the lakeside route because the lake looked good and hadn't been able to explain it better than that. He thought about a Tuesday in June when 40 seconds at parallel bars had been everything. He thought about a man in a parking structure on Michigan Avenue with a business card and a smooth voice, and the specific clarity of knowing exactly who you were when someone tried to suggest you were someone else. He thought about the wheel on the Christmas tree and the notebook Emma kept for tracking lavender and physical therapy progress, and a voicemail he'd saved and played exactly once since July, in which his father had said, "I'm proud of you, son," after Nathan had described, very briefly, the shape of the past year. Not the investigation, not the detail, just the general architecture of it. His father had said, "I'm proud of you," and Nathan had said, "Thanks, Dad." And that had been the whole conversation, which was enough. He thought about Claire. He always thought about Claire. He had a theory, not fully formed, that the people we lose don't actually leave in the way we fear they do. That they become part of the architecture instead, structural rather than present, the foundation of how you understand things. Claire was in his approach to problems and in the way Emma laughed and in the decision to show up consistently for things that mattered, which was the central decision Nathan had made about how to live, and which he had made partly because Claire had shown him what it looked like. She would have been amused by the lavender plant, he thought. She would have had opinions about the ketchup argument. She would have looked at Victoria with the particular look she used when she had determined something about a person that she intended to keep to herself for exactly as long as it remained interesting. And then she would have found a moment and said it directly and been right. He thought, I'm okay. Not in the performed way, not in the managing way. In the actual present tense, this is where I am way. I'm okay. Beside him, Victoria had stopped walking. He stopped too and looked at her, and she was looking at the lake with an expression he didn't try to name because some expressions don't have names, and you do them a disservice by trying. What? He said. Nothing. She paused. Everything. She paused again. I was thinking about the route, the one they built for Marcus, the fake alert, rerouting him to the Edens so the weather and the speed and the sensor would all add up to the right outcome. She was quiet, and I was thinking, if they hadn't done it, if Marcus had taken the standard route, if nothing had happened that night. She looked up at him. I would still be running those 6 miles every morning. I would be in the building right now, on a Sunday, reviewing Q1 projections. I would have married the wrong man and not known it for years. A pause. I would never have hired a driver who knew what a deferred pressure sensor meant. He looked at her. I don't think the accident happening was worth it, he said carefully. No, she said, it wasn't. It cost Marcus everything. I would trade all of this for him to still be alive. That's true, and I mean it completely. She looked at the lake. But I also think sometimes the things that break us are the only route to where we needed to be. Not because it's fair, just because that's how it happened. He thought about this. He thought about Claire and the stroke and the parking structure at Northwestern Memorial, and Emma asleep in the back seat and a watermark on a ceiling he'd never bothered to report because there were things you learned to live with. Yeah, he said. I think that's right. Down the path, Emma stood up from the dog, waved a dramatic goodbye to it, and came running back toward them with the full energy of a child returning from a successful mission. His name is Gerald, she announced. He's 3 years old and he knows how to shake hands. I shook hands with Gerald, she demonstrated, extending her hand to no one. Gerald sounds exceptional, Victoria said. He was, Emma agreed. She looked up at both of them with the expression Nathan recognized as prelude, the gathering of argument, the preparation of a case. I've been thinking, she said. About what? Nathan said. About Gerald, Emma said, and about how some dogs need homes. Nathan looked at Victoria. Victoria looked at Nathan. They were both, without coordination, trying not to smile, which meant they were both, without coordination, smiling. We're walking, Nathan told Emma. Walk with us. Emma fell in beside Victoria, which she did naturally now, the way children adapt to the physical realities of the people they love and stop seeing them as different after a while. She reached up and took Victoria's hand, which she did sometimes without announcement, and Victoria's hand closed around hers with the particular grip of someone who is still learning that this is something she gets to have. The three of them walked south along the lakefront path in the February cold, the gray-green lake beside them, the city behind them, the empty path ahead going as far as they could see. Nathan Cross was 32 years old, and most days now he felt exactly his age, not older, not worn past what the years actually warranted. He had a daughter who kept a notebook and shook hands with dogs named Gerald, and had decided at 7 years old that the people her father needed were the people she was going to make room for. He had work he was good at, and a back that still complained in cold weather, and a landlord who still hadn't fixed the roof, and a father in Michigan who said, "I'm proud of you" on the phone and meant it. He had this, the path and the lake, and the cold air, and two people beside him who had come into his life through the machinery of accident and contract, and a set of circumstances that none of them would have chosen, and who were, despite or maybe because of all of that, exactly where they were supposed to be. The lavender plant on Victoria's terrace had survived the winter. Emma had been right about the mulch. Some things, if you pay attention to them, hold. The lake kept moving the way it always moved, gray-green and enormous and indifferent, not doing it for anyone, just doing it. The city stood on its own reflection to the west. The path went on. They walked,